Hi everyone, good morning. I hope everyone's well and can hear me okay. Welcome to All Inclusive Champion Accessible Museums, our one-day event run by the Museum Association. It's great to see so many people attending today, and I know that's it's a great sign for the sector that people are so committed to this area of work. And also testament to the speakers who we have today, who are all really amazing in their own fields. My name is Rebecca Atkinson. I'm the event programmer at the MA, and I'll be facilitating today. As a visual description, I'm a white cis woman in my early 40s with brown, straight grey hair and a red orangey jumper. Before I hand over to our chair, Sam Bowen, to get started, I just have some quick housekeeping announcements. So first of all, we're delighted that AI Media will be providing captions, speech to text captions today. To benefit from these, just click the closed captioning button on the menu bar and either select show subtitles for real-time subtitles or the full transcript if you want to see the session in its entirety. We also have two BSL signers, Kim and Heather, who are available on the chat. They are here for a delegate, but if you would like to benefit from BSL, then you can also pin them to your screen. As you can see, the event has been run on Zoom meetings, and if you're able to, we'd love it if you can keep your camera on, but please do mute yourself unless asked otherwise. If you're able to use the chat, then it'd be great if you could let us know now, I guess, your name, where you're zooming in from, and what you're hoping to get from today. We'll also be using chat to ask questions throughout the event. If you do have a question, it'd be great if you could put Q&A at the start and the name of the speaker, if applicable, just for ease. We also have a Google document, the link for which I put into the join instructions, and I will share again in a moment in the chat. And if you prefer to use this, that's absolutely fine. I'll be keeping an eye on it throughout the event. And again, you can use that to introduce yourself or to ask questions. There also will be an opportunity to ask questions verbally. So if you're able to, you can use the, is it called emoji on the button bar? So I've forgotten now, I'll just double check what it's called, to kind of raise your hand, and then we can ask you to unmute at the appropriate time and ask your question verbally. The event will remain open until we close at 4 p.m. So if you do need to leave or your internet drops out, then you can rejoin again by the waiting room. And we are recording the discussion today, and it will be available early next week, possibly tomorrow actually, along with the chat and the captioned transcript. And I will email that over hopefully tomorrow, possibly Monday, depending on how long it takes to download or Zoom, because sometimes it takes ages. But that's all from me. I'd now like to introduce today's chair, Sam Bowen, Send Museums campaigner. Over to you, Sam.
Thank you, Rebecca. Good morning, everybody. My name's Sam Bowen. I'm a white woman in her early 50s with long blonde hair. Full disclosure, it's not real blonde. I've got green eyes and I'm wearing a green, sort of mushy pea green, I call that, roll neck jumper today because it's quite chilly. So I'll put the heating on, but I've also got glasses on, which I may remove at some point as well, and head speaker set thing, so I can hear and speak to you today. So it's really lovely to be chairing this event for the second year running. I think it's a fourth year running that I've actually been to this event, and it's great that it's online, because I think, look where you're all coming from. It's great. It's popping up all over the UK actually, and I think there's somebody from Australia coming today. Is that true? Or no, actually, maybe that's somewhere else. But anyway, it's great to have you all here from lots of different places. We've got incredible speakers today. We're talking about championing accessible spaces. I'm just going to quickly share my slides because my specialism is in SEND, which is special educational needs and disability, and that broadly covers young people from 0, as in birth, to 25. So I'm just going to quickly share those. This is always the techie bit, isn't it? There we go. Rebecca, can you just nod if you can see that? Okay. Great. So just really briefly to introduce what other work that I'm doing, but also why I'm here, I guess. For those of you who don't know me, hello. I've worked in the sector for over 25 years, everything from being a curator. I loved all my jobs actually, but curator was fun. Learning manager for a very large heritage site, and more latterly museum development officer for South East Museum development. So the reason why I say that is not to blow my own little trumpet, but it's the fact that with a broad background and experience, I will never suggest something to somebody or an organisation which I don't know, I couldn't have done myself. That makes sense. I think that's important. But 13 and a half years ago, I had my daughter, who's my only child, it's Lucy. It's here in the picture on the right. And this is a picture of us both in summer clothing. So I'm wearing a summer dress and she's wearing a t-shirt. And Lucy's a wheelchair user. She's on the right here. And we've both got red sort of wraparound headgear, which is actually part of the handling collection at a wonderful museum called Powell Cotton Museum in Birchington, Kent. And behind us, you can probably see some natural history objects which are free to handle and play with and explore. And there are no labels, which is really great. So this place is a very inclusive environment. And it's probably the spot, the place where I had my wow moment, where I thought, yes, museums definitely can be accessible and inclusive to send audiences and their families, for schools, carers, such like, and the children and young people themselves. Now, I had to give up my career for a short time, well, 8 years, not a short time, is it? When I had Lucy because of her disabilities. She has a unique genetic condition and that impacts and gives her some complex medical needs. She's also a term that I am trying to explore. Maybe together we can come up with a better way of saying this, but typically she's described as something called non-verbal, which means that she doesn't use spoken word to communicate. She's incredibly verbal. So I think that's something that I'm going to explore in my short session here, but I'd be interested as a provocation to you later to go, how do we communicate with people who communicate differently to us, and the effort that we put in as well, we should be putting in more effort. So we had some pretty negative experiences going out as a family, and that angered me, actually, I'm not going to lie. We had some ableist experiences as well. And so I thought, well, once you were settled in the school, I'm going to go back to the sector. I got my old job back as Museum Development Officer, and I was very fortunate to be facilitated in that role to go and make change. And I've been doing that since 2017. And in 2021, I won the MA Radical Changemaker Award for that work. But basically, what do I mean about being SEND friendly? It means basically that families and young people can feel confident in your museum spaces and enjoy them in the ways that are appropriate for them and have equitable experiences. And inclusion does mean that everybody can access the museum in their own way, and the experiences create great memories, which I think is really important. And that's the business that we're in for everybody, isn't it? And this in turn promotes self-confidence and positive well-being. And it's not just for the visitors I'm talking about, this is for the museum staff too. I've run scores of projects now across the country with museums and different SEND groups of loads of different ages, from preschool through to post-16. And always, always, always the museum staff that I've been involved with in those projects said how much more they enjoyed their jobs afterwards, how they brought a different, fresh perspective to their work and appreciated even the collections and the stories within them in a different way. And they were totally led and taught by the young people themselves who they had worked with. I also believe that inclusion within your museum tackles social isolation and loneliness. This is a known thing for SEND families. And as we talk broadly, maybe some of our speakers may say about disabled adults and how that impacts them, but particularly made worse since COVID and the pandemic and the exclusion that we saw within society. And there are many SEND children who are still playing catch up in terms of their therapy and learning goals and health. I do believe that museums can make a real difference in social inclusion, and we can also set best practice locally within your communities. So basically what I mean is, if by being welcoming for everyone and being exemplary in equity, you make disability visible in museums, and therefore representation naturally comes from that. I think that's hugely important, but it's also exciting. It's an exciting opportunity because I think museums are different to other places in society. They're sort of places of meeting, a natural meeting point where people from different communities can come together, learn from each other, and actually just by sharing experiences together at the same time, inclusion grows from that. So that's why I'm excited about museums particularly. Just a really brief introduction, and there is the website which I should have pointed to at the beginning. I got 2 years worth of funding from Arts Council and Heritage Lottery for creating a portal website. It's sendinmuseums.org, and there will be links in the slides. And it's everything you could possibly want and need in there to advocate for and support you in developing resources and programming to be supportive for SEND families and schools. But the basic the SEND itself is actually called ASN in Scotland, so it's additional support needs, and ALN in Wales, additional learning needs. It covers a birth to 25 years, as I've said. I think it's important to point out here, and some of you go, well, why on earth is she saying this? I have lived experience of people saying, but you can't be a SEND mum, you've got a master's degree. SEND disability comes from all socioeconomic and cultural backgrounds and locations. And I think there is a deep misunderstanding within our community, certainly within Britain anyway, particularly maybe within England, that disability comes from a certain place or has certain connotations, particularly birth disability and youth disability. But they also have the same hopes and expectations for a visit as any other family. Why wouldn't they? They just might need some additional resources and support so that they can access the things that you're offering in an equitable way. Everybody deserves a warm welcome and a good visit, but for memory making and building confidence for families who have felt excluded in other areas, you might just need to extend that warm welcome a bit more. And I think memory making, without saying it in a way that's triggering for anyone here, memory making when you don't know how much chance you've got left in your life to memory make, as many children, including my own, have life-limiting conditions. Lucy actually goes to a hospice for respite. Every visit that you make, every hour that you spend out into an accessible space is locked in that memory bank. It's important stuff. So if that doesn't give you goosebumps and give you a little quell of excitement that you can be making a massive difference that lasts years beyond that visit, then talk to me later. We'll need to do some work with you. Learning and engagement looks different for everyone. We know this already. Some key statistics, 9% of the children in the UK at the moment are disabled. That figure's risen from 8% in the last time the census was done. It's done every sort of 2 to 3 years. So, and this is a rising figure. By the time we do this again next year, that could easily be looking at 10%. But if we add siblings and friends into the mix as well, because, okay, so Lucy's an only child, but many children aren't in an only child sort of family setup, we could be looking at as many as 20% or a fifth of the UK child population being affected by the access needs of that disabled child. And what I mean by that is, I don't think I hope none of us in this space today would think that it would be acceptable or ethical to say, well, we can provide a visit for you, these members of the family, but I'm sorry, we're not accessible to your disabled child. Please leave them at home, or nanny and granddad can go and take them off for the day. That's just not, that's not good business sense, and it's not ethical, it's not inclusive. So the market you are missing, and when I do lots of training over the years, I've had to give advocacy tools for people, usually learning and engagement staff who may need to sell this upwards to managers to unlock some resources in time or even money. But this is a key figure. Throw in the purple pound, which is the UK disability spend of £267 billion, then we're starting to talk about then large figures, large numbers of people, a large audience and market, which absolutely is worthy of your time and resources in terms of supporting them. And over 10% of homes in the UK have a disabled child. But what's in a label? So in my training, what I do is I try to take off labels, and something which I haven't said today is Lucy was mislabeled within 20 minutes of her being born. It was a horrible experience, probably one of the most ableist things ever happened to me. And I am traumatized by it still 13 and a half years on. I was told within 20 minutes of her being born that she had Down syndrome, which was wrong, and it was done on visual appearance alone. That wasn't the last time that a doctor or a medical person has just made that assumption and come out with that statement. And there are some actually quite funny stories, anecdotes I have about that, which, well, they're funny in a horrible horrible humorous way, but they're quite funny the way we dealt with them. But the point is, even if Lucy had Down syndrome, that's just one element about her, isn't it? Or would have been. And also I have the great delight now of knowing many young people, children and young people with Down syndrome as a particular condition, and they're very different to each other. And it also, as that condition affects them in very different ways. So we are not just a label. We're all part of many statistics, and a label becomes othering. It's just not helpful or kind. And so for your purposes, you don't need to know what somebody's label is in they're coming into your museum space. You need to know their access needs and how you can best support that. So we address needs, access needs over diagnosis, an identity and person first led approach. And we're all a mix of different preferences and behaviors anyway, because we're all human and no two humans are the same. But this can also fluctuate depending on our external environment. So if I'm having a good day, I'm going to potentially be less sensory triggered than on a day where I'm feeling anxious. And that is the case for everyone. So let's consider similarities. Let's consider opportunities to understanding people with different access needs to our own, but also look at how we're similar. And also think, what do you really love about your museum that you want to share with a SEND child and young person? What's the vibe going on in your place, which is unique to you? What's your USP? An image I've got here is of Lucy. She is wearing a striped top. She's got a bib on, she's got her glasses on, and she's sat in a wheelchair, and she's looking up to her right at what looks like, actually in the photograph, it looks like a photograph of a chocolate Labrador dog. It's in a frame, it's in a gallery, and there's pictures either side to it. It's actually a drawing. It's just one of those hyper realistic drawings, which really looks like a real drawing, a photo, sorry. Next to this is it's a stock image actually of a white man wearing jeans and a checked top. He's in a bland gallery environment like Lucy is, and he's stood in front of three, I think these are photographs of dogs again, canines, and they've got human sort of hands comically sort of posed to be like under their chin. They're both totally absorbed at what they're looking at. So my provocation here is similar image, similar engagement. What do we mean by engagement? And how do we value it differently for one person over another? So why do we need to start learning about how people, what they actually get out, what are the outcomes of a museum visit? But then why are we valuing one over the other in terms of judgment? And Lucy wasn't able to tell me because she's not a word user, really why when we went to this exhibition, she paused in front of that picture, really stared at it for a long time. However, her grandfather was blind and had guide dogs, many guide dogs. We knew about 4 in the time that we knew him. None of them were actually chocolate labs. They were all, is it called yellow or blonde? They were the yellowy blonde ones. But I feel that this one is because she kind of recognized the breed of the dog or the shape of the dog, and she has a resonance with it. It was really interesting to her. So just a slight provocation again about who we welcome in. Now, and maybe many people on the call are thinking, well, why on earth is she saying that? But I know, having done this for many years and been a visitor for many years and worked in the sector for many years, there is still, sadly, a perception, particularly I would say about learning disability, a negative perception or an unconscious bias about who museums are for. And if you can't read the labels or understand the concepts behind something or a historical narrative, perhaps, that actually, why are you even in the museum space in the first place? I won't swear because I promised Rebecca I won't swear, but that's balderdash. Museums are so many different things for so many people, and galleries too. So I just want you to welcome that and the fact that everybody has an equal right to be in there and engage in their own way. There's top tips here. As I say in my training, we're running out of time, but do have a conversation with all of your staff. You'd be surprised how many people have got lived experience of SEND. And actually then that sort of, you've got them within your organisation, advocates of lived experience to use. Please do seek out local advocates. And I'm sure many of the speakers today are going to be talking about that. So I won't go any deeper into doing this. And just keep things simple to start with and build on this. And your confidence will grow as you develop this work more and more. You don't need to become an expert in this. The experts are the young people visiting with their families and schools themselves. Much of SEND inclusion is common sense and either free or affordable. Every child actually has the legal and cultural right to access culture in your museum, but we are wanting to be doing so in our own way. And do value open-ended approaches as well. Value all output when it comes to creative activities. All of this, again, is on the website, so do spend some time to have a look at. And there's the website details there. You're going to get all of these slides. But I'm just going to leave you with a provocation for today, and we can pick up on this later. How do we give young people without voice, without spoken voice, word, agency? I think it's important that we don't overlook the adults that they come with as being their voice potentially and their advocates for them. They come with loved and lived experience, and I think both are very powerful. And I have seen, sadly online, a trend in silencing the adult and the parents because they go, well, but that's your opinion of what this person wants. I think we need to appreciate that there's a certain point, particularly when the child's very young, where actually that loved lived experience is a blended experience, and then they're speaking out of a place of agency. But actually, maybe we need to learn better skills on understanding how to communicate with people, young people who don't use spoken word. I am going to stop sharing there. Hopefully that was an interesting provocation and insight into my work, and do get in touch with the details that you've got on the slides. But it's my absolute delight now, and running over just by 1 minute, sorry about that, Shani, to introduce our incredible keynote speaker today. Shani Danda is a disability inclusion and accessibility specialist, a social entrepreneur, and a broadcaster. And you're joining us today, aren't you, Shani, to talk about how you work with helping businesses to remove barriers and become more inclusive and accessible to disabled people. Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks, Sam. So hi, everyone. I'm Shani, and I am a cisgendered South Asian woman who experiences disability. My pronouns are she, her, and I have mid-length, dark brown hair, and today I'm wearing a patterned jumper, and it's got orange, brown, and pink colours in it. And it's a real pleasure to be here with you. I've really enjoyed looking at where you're all coming from in the chat, thinking, oh, I've been there, I haven't been there yet. So really, thanks so much for joining today. And Sam, it's an honour to speak after you. I really resonated with a lot of the points that you made. And you know, you're absolutely right. Museums and cultural spaces are for everybody, but there are so many barriers in everybody accessing them. And so what I hope to do now in the time that I have is to take on a bit of a journey of what does exclusion look like? How is it created? And how do we actually remove barriers when so many different people have lots of different needs all at the same time? So I'm just going to share my screen. Hopefully you'll be able to see that. So as Sam said, I am an inclusion consultant, and I work with lots of different businesses and brands. And on the screen, there are all the different logos of the companies that I've worked with. You've got big corporates, but I also work with lots of different public and third sector organizations as well. And I really love that I get to work with different organizations and hold them to account and help them on their disability inclusion journey, because I completely understand that it can be uncomfortable, it can be fearful, it can be messy. Expect it to be messy and expect there to be lots of mistakes. But when you work with experts and you have guidance, then, you know, a lot can be achieved. So I spend a lot of my time advocating for rights for disabled people, but I'm also on a bit of a mission to help disabled people save money. So today here in the UK, we are going to receive a new report that tells us that disabled people on average face unavoidable extra costs of just under £1,000 per month. When I talk about extra costs, what I'm talking about are everyday costs that are unavoidable for disabled people. So for me, what that looks like is because I have a short stature, I can't go into a shop and buy and wear clothes straight away. I have to get them tailored. So there's a lot of money that I have to spend on that. I can't use public transport, therefore I spend a lot of money on taxis. And last year I worked out that living in an inaccessible society for me cost me an extra £13,000 a year. So I'm launching an app to help disabled people save money. And on the screen, there's lots of different headlines from news articles and tweets that I've shared. It's a hidden crisis, because if it doesn't affect you, you don't know about it. But this is something that you do need to be aware of in your work as well. But I also spend a lot of my time in the cultural and arts sector. So I founded, I think it's the world's first Asian Woman Festival. I know it's definitely the UK's first ever Asian Woman Festival. And essentially, I was just looking for a like-minded event or space where I could meet like-minded South Asian women. But the only events and things I could find were to either book my wedding venue or buy a new sari. And I wasn't interested in any of those things. So I thought, well, why don't I just, create it and see what happens? I opened a big can of worms, and now we're a global community of over 30,000. And I curated an art exhibition by South Asian female artists, all about identity, and everybody got to sell their artwork on the day. So I'm really proud that I was able to help provide that opportunity. We're an annual festival and we take place every year if anybody's interested. And finally, I also created a grassroots community called the Asian Disability Network. So disability faces an even further sense of stigma in certain communities, and that is the case for the South Asian community. And it's the big feeling of conflict, trying to manage your disability identity, your cultural identity, perhaps your religious identity, and many other identities all at the same time. So this is my way of creating a safe space and trying to help people to navigate that. But I want to share a bit about my story. So I was born with a very rare genetic condition. It's got this fancy word called osteogenesis imperfecta. And on the screen, there's a picture of my mum, and I'm age 2 and she's holding me. And it was 2 years old when I received my diagnosis. So the condition's quite rare. It affects about 1 in 20,000 people. And it means that my bones break without any trauma. It's more commonly known as brittle bone disease. So people with my condition just cough and they can break a rib. You don't have to have an accident or an injury in order for your bones to break. And as a result of the condition, I also have a short stature. So it meant that I had a really unpredictable childhood. My bones would just break, not doing much at all. Spent a lot of time in hospital, but also as a result of that, I went to a special needs primary school. So I was essentially segregated in education. Don't get me wrong, I absolutely loved it. I had a great time, but it wasn't until I went to a mainstream secondary school did I realize that actually that wasn't the right place for my learning needs. Because I just felt like I didn't know the basics when I went to a mainstream secondary school. On the screen right now, there's a picture of my class 1 photo, so a group photo of me and my classmates, and I'm on the front row. And this is just what inclusion was in education back in the early 90s. This was the only way I could get an education, because this was the only type of setting that would be able to manage my physical care needs, and I'm, a wheelchair user. So it's important to note that, I'm 35 now, so people my age and above have been segregated from disabled people for a lot of their lives. And I understand that's why people don't really understand disabled people, because maybe they don't know any, they don't have any friends that are disabled. And there's stats out there by the charity Scope that tells us that when you know disabled people, you're much more likely to understand their needs, obviously, but also have less fear, when meeting their needs as well. So after I went to secondary school, and I left school with 11 GCSEs, but again, really struggled. I didn't feel like I could keep up academically with my peers. And when I was leaving school, I had like a careers advisor appointment, and they just sort of said to me, oh, you know, you should try and apply for a job in your local council because they like to employ disabled people. And I came away from that thinking, why is that? Why was that what was said to me? Like, that's so bizarre. No one asked me what I wanted to do, what my interests were. And I came away from that thinking, well, maybe that was just their perception. Like, surely not everybody can think like that about disabled people. But I was so wrong, because I left secondary school and I started to apply for jobs. And it wasn't until I removed any mention of my condition was I offered an interview. So I applied for so many jobs, but I felt like I had to remove a big part of my identity from my applications. So on the screen, there are some screenshots and a picture of me, and the headlines say, woman who applied for 100 jobs finally got an interview after hiding her disability. But the reason that I also wanted to share this is because look at how sensationalized this headline is. I can't hide the fact that I have a short stature. I just decided to take that one sentence off. And by taking that one sentence off, I got offered an interview straight away. So I learned a really harsh life lesson at the age of 16, that people are judging my ability based on my appearance, but also just writing the fact that I live with a condition in my application. So then I felt really lost, really hopeless. I thought, how on earth am I going to live? How am I going to earn money if it's been this difficult for me to get a part-time job? You know, how am I gonna ever fulfill all my dreams and, you know, travel and live independently? So I thought, right, I have to go to university because I felt like I had to have a degree to fall back on. And this experience of not being able to get a job, a part-time job, really, I think, is where I developed a bit of an entrepreneurial mindset. I just felt like I couldn't rely on other people for opportunities. I felt like I had to always overcompensate and make sure that I was in control of creating them for myself. So I went to uni, and by the way, like, when you're in a special educational needs setting, nobody's talking to you about going to university. Like, and culturally, because disability faces an even further sense of stigma, those in my community had the lowest expectations for me as well. I faced a lot of infantilization, on top of which being a girl, being a woman in my community faces an additional set of barriers as well. So off I went to uni. I chose to do a degree in event management, and I only chose it because in my family, I'm the person that organizes the parties and the get-togethers. There was no like strategic plan to choose that course. However, I chose a career that was so suited to my skill set because of everything that I've learned living in a world that isn't designed for me. So on the screen at the moment, there's a picture of me with some clients that I worked with. They're both really famous boxers, world champion sportsmen. There's a picture of me and Anthony Joshua and a picture of me and Tyson Fury. And, you know, I'm 3'10", I'm the height of a 4-year-old, and figuring out how I reach my kitchen cupboards, or, you know, living in a world where there are more clothes designed for dogs than disabled people, those things are the least of my worries. But it's also taught me to think really creatively. It's taught me to think outside of the box. And those are the skills that you need to work in the event management industry. And what I really loved is, you know, the likes of Anthony Joshua and Tyson Fury, when they were turning up to the UK's most prestigious venues, they were not expecting me to be the person running the entire event, looking after their needs, everything, you know, catering, the guests. So what I really loved is I got to challenge people's perceptions just by doing something that I really enjoyed, but I was also really good at it as well. And now I spend a lot of my time working with different organizations, businesses, speaking on some of the world's biggest stages. and helping to really demystify disability. And I'm now also enjoying lots of different broadcasting opportunities as well. So that the previous 2 slides I've just shared have lots of different images of me doing lots of different work-related things. And it's really important that when you're taking up space in the disability community, that we are truly representing the community's needs. Like, don't get me wrong, what I'm not saying is, I'm not saying that I represent all disabled people. I absolutely don't, and I would never want to. However, I grew up without ever seeing any disabled people of colour on my screen. And at the age of 35, I've only still ever seen 4, and that doesn't include me. So we've got so much further to go. Disability is still seen as a them and a situation. We still really only see disabled people on screen when they're talking about disability issues. So we've still got a really long way to go when it comes to representation, which feeds into the perceptions of disabled people. But the reason that I've shared all of that with you, the reason I've shared a bit about my story, isn't because I wanted to show you how nice me and Anthony Joshua look together. Like, yes, I'm obsessed with him. Or how cute my baby pictures are. It's because I want to share with you that it was never my condition that disabled me. It was the world and the bias that people have, because conditions and impairments are what people are either born with or acquire throughout their life, and they can be non-visible or visible. And actually 70% of disabled people live with non-visible conditions and impairments. So it's really important that you understand what disability is. It isn't just ramps and wheelchairs. It isn't just about physical barriers. It's about neurodiverse people. It's about people that acquire their conditions. It's about people who live with non-visible conditions and might not ever feel comfortable sharing that with you as a visitor or as an employer either. So disability is an experience. And although I live with my condition every single day, 24/7, I don't always experience disability. That's a really radical definition and distinction that you need to understand. And I know that some of you have already done some work on understanding the different models of disability, but there are 2 main models of how we understand disability. One's the medical model, which everybody will know of, even if you don't know it's called that. And there's another one called the social model. So on the screen, there's an illustration of somebody sitting in a wheelchair in front of a big flight of steps that says, and there's a sign and it says, "Weigh in, everybody welcome." And what the medical model would say, well, it's her impairment that is the problem here. That's why she can't get in the building and up the steps. We need to cure her. We need to get her out of the chair. Essentially, the medical model focuses on fixing people and curing people. Whereas the social model says, well, actually, no, like, why don't we design accessible places and spaces and buildings? Then it doesn't matter how you move in society, everything is accessible for you. Now, I want to make a really key distinction here. I'm not bashing healthcare. I am not saying it's bad. I'm not vilifying people who want to cure. That's not the case at all. Like, I would not have the quality of life that I have now if it wasn't for the NHS and if it wasn't for medical intervention. However, there's limits to that. There is no cure for my condition. And I manage my health to the best of my ability with my medical professionals, but I can't use public transport, and I can't call up my consultant and say, hey, can you fix transport for London's poor infrastructure? That's the responsibility of architects, of designers, of people that plan our towns and cities. So it's really important to understand that disability is a social construct. And not everybody knows about the social model. So just pop in the chat, actually, if just put yes or no, like, do you already know about it? Is it a new concept to you? Have you heard about it before? Because staggeringly, 74% of disabled people said that they also had not heard about the social model of disability at all. So my advice to you is, wherever possible, perhaps on your website, perhaps if you are explaining why you use certain terminology, like using terminology disabled people, which is rooted in the language of the social model, take these small opportunities to direct people to what the social model is, explain why you have made certain decisions. And if you haven't already within your organization, please do adopt the social model. It's a brilliant starting point for everything, and it will be your guide on the language that you use, the policies that you create, the way in which you offer access needs to your visitors. It's a great touch point across everything that you do, and it's the best guide out there. I also briefly wanted to talk a little bit about ableism, because it is the lesser known isms of all the isms out there. So ableism is the discrimination and prejudice of disabled people. It's like what racism is to race and what sexism is to sex, for example. So on the screen, there's a Crippen illustration. If you don't know what Crippen cartoons are, go and check them out. They're brilliant. They're very tongue-in-cheek. And the cartoon on that I'm sharing, there's an illustration of a wheelchair user, and the person standing next to them is a blind person with a guide dog, and they're standing in front of a man who's saying, "We've removed all the barriers for you, but you're all still tragic victims." And behind the man saying that are broken barriers on the floor. One says attitudinal barriers and one says physical barriers. And ableism is entrenched in our society, and ableism is rooted in the assumption that non-disabled people or typical abilities are superior. So that's why, you know, disabled people face so many barriers, because we haven't been included, we haven't been thought of in decision-making processes. You know, it's a travesty that disabled people can't use public transport. That's a big reason as to why many of us can't work, for example, just as an example. But the tip that I wanted to share with you about this is that the best way to spot ableism is to replace a situation with, let's say, race or gender. So if, let's say, buildings made it impossible for women to enter, that would definitely be sexist, right? We'll now apply that, you know, replace those situations with disability, and you will quickly soon see how ableist a lot of things are in society. And don't forget that language can also be ableist as well. So that's why it's a really good tip to adopt the social model, because it will help you, again, guide you with language. But the truth of the matter is that disability affects each and every one of us, because as I've previously shared, disability is an experience. And people living with conditions and impairments, that can be permanent, that can be temporary, and that can also be situational as well. The best example that I can give here is when a lot of museums, a lot of cultural heritage sites went online during the pandemic. How many more people did that give access to? But as a byproduct, as a default, how many more disabled people also had access for the very first time? But look what it had to take. It had to take a global pandemic for people by accident to meet the needs of disabled people. So the truth of the matter is that we all have abilities and we all have limits to those abilities. I live with my condition all of the time, but I know loads of people that experience disability as a result of temporarily having an injury and other reasons as well. And on the screen, I'm sharing an illustration from Microsoft's Inclusive Design Toolkit, and they have broken down some examples under different categories. So there's the 4 senses: the touch, see, hear, and speak, and the categories permanent, temporary, and situational. But this is a really great resource. So I recommend that you go and look this up after, because it helps you to make decisions that are inclusive from the beginning. So we've spoken a lot now about exclusion, what it looks like, how it happens, because the truth of the matter is that actually, when we make decisions, when we design products and services, when we make decisions that are going to affect lots of other people, usually we only think about, we usually only make decisions from the knowledge that we have or from the bias that we have. How often do we stop and think about all the potential possible users out there? How often do we think about all the potential different types of visitor personas that might be coming to our sites and to our museums and galleries? So by default, we are very exclusionary. And that's why when you want to be intentional about inclusion, you have to be intentional with your action. So on the screen, I'm sharing an illustration, and there are three people of all different heights, and they're all trying to watch a football game. And in front of them is a wooden fence. And in the first image on the left, everybody has been given one box each to stand on, because what this is trying to depict is that it's assumed that when you treat everybody the same, when you give everybody the same thing, that they're being treated equally, but not everybody still has equal access to see the game. So the shortest person is still unable to see over the fence. So equality doesn't go far enough, because not everyone is starting from the same point. And in the middle box, we can now see that everyone's individual needs have been taken into account. The tallest person didn't even need a box to stand on, whereas the shortest person needed 2 boxes to stand on. So this is an example of how we treat people equitably. And I think that a lot of organizations are somewhere in between box 1 and box 2. But the world that I want to live in is the world on the far right, because the wooden fence has now gone. The design of the fence has changed. It's now a see-through fence instead. And now everybody has access to the game without asking for support or adjustments, because the systemic barrier has been removed. And essentially, this is the hack that you all need to know. Think about what are the systemic barriers that people are facing, not just about disability. This can be applied to all of the other protected characteristics as well under the Equality Act, but other barriers and differences as well. Because I can't tell you how exhausting and expensive it is to go around in life constantly asking people to do things differently for me. Don't want to have to do that. I just want to live in an accessible society. And accessibility, not only is it the right thing to do, it benefits everyone, because when you remove barriers for disabled people, by default, you're removing them for many other people as well. But don't forget that it's also a legal obligation. It's a legal obligation. And being inclusive only brings you lots of benefits, because there's lots of research out there that says organizations that have an inclusive culture are twice as likely to meet or exceed financial targets. They're 3 times as likely to be high performing. They're 6 times more likely to be innovative and agile, and 8 times more likely to achieve above business outcomes as well. So it's only a road paved with benefits when you have an inclusive culture, not only internally but externally as well. But it's really important that our inclusion is from an intersectional perspective. So intersectionality refers to how different characteristics and different identities all overlap, and they create a really unique compounding effect. So if I use myself as an example, as a South Asian woman who experiences disability, as a disabled person, I'm twice as likely to be to be unemployed, I have to apply for 60% more jobs. And I face a disability pay gap so wide that I earn £3,000 less a year. As a South Asian person, I'm 3 times as likely to be unemployed and face an ethnicity pay gap. And then as a woman, I am likely to be paid less than my male counterparts because of the gender pay gap. So really quickly, intersectionality helps us to look at different types of oppression and privilege that people have in society. But the thing is, what I'm seeing is that when people are approaching inclusion, they are not doing it from an intersectional perspective. So if you're looking to meet the needs of disabled people and to remove barriers for disabled people, you've also got to think about all of the different types of intersectionality disabled people have. Because when I leave my front door in the morning, I can't ever decide to leave any of my identities at the door. I can't just not be disabled for a day. This is the really unique way in which this is the unique lens that I experience the world in. Everywhere I show up, I'm showing up as all of me, but everybody only ever wants to meet some of my needs, not all of them. So it's really important to get to grips with intersectionality and what that means, and understand that where you sit on this wheel of privilege and oppression, you're going to have a really different experience in life. I also briefly wanted to talk about disability inclusion in relation to employment, because there are lots of different economic barriers to participation for disabled people. And remember earlier, I shared that we face so many unavoidable extra costs. So for those disabled people that can and want to work, which there are over 1 million of us in this country, we're being shut out of the workplace. But work's really important for us because of extra costs. But we also face a real lack of support, not only when applying for jobs, but also if we're lucky enough to get the role as well. And we also face lots of different negative perceptions as well. So disabled people have to apply for 60% more jobs, as I shared earlier. And there are lots of bias and perceptions in society that disabled people are a risky hire, that we take loads of time off work with ill health. We cost a lot of money to hire because of adaptations, but that's simply not the case. There's research out there that proves all of the opposite. And if you don't already know about this, here in the UK, we have something called Access to Work. What this is a discretionary government grant, and it gives disabled people up to nearly £70,000 worth of funding in order to get adjustments. This could be things like communication support, like BSL interpreters, captioning. It could be travel to work. It could be a support worker at work. It could be helping to cover the cost of a wheelchair. There's lots of different things, but believe you me, it's the best kept hidden secret, I believe, in the government. So go and look it up. It's called Access to Work. Tell everybody you know about it. You know, if you've got internal groups within your organisation, disability employee network groups, tell everybody about it. So this is my last slide, and I wanted to share just some tips where to start in really helping to create systemic change, not only for your disabled employees, but the benefits of this will also greatly impact your visitors as well. So it's really important that you start to build your knowledge on disability. We here in the UK are a community of at least 16 million people. That's a quarter of the population. That's almost 1 in 4 of us that experience disability. And remember, it's not all about ramps and wheelchairs. We've got to think about people that live with conditions and impairments that are not visible, that won't come and tell you that they need support or access because of lots of different reasons. So it's important to ensure that you know what disability is, you've got a solid definition, your organisation knows what that definition is, and that you're sharing that, and you're confident to talk about disability as well. because only by doing that will you then be able to confidently meet the needs of your disabled employees and visitors. It's really important as well to look under the bonnet, like, how do you stack up as an organization? Do you know how many disabled people visitors that you have? Do you know maybe some of the reasons why you don't? Have you done an accessibility audit to understand what the current challenges are? And let's not forget, this doesn't include your physical spaces. This is your website as well. So many disabled people, actually 7 in 10 disabled people have clicked away from a website because it is not accessible. And don't forget that the law tells you that you need to be as well. So there are certain guidelines, the web accessibility guidelines. And I don't know if any of you have ever heard of Ewan's Guide, but they also do an access survey report every year. And on there, it tells you the percentage of disabled people that look at accessibility information before deciding whether to visit a venue or not. It's really important that your information is current, it's up to date, it provides all the information that you possibly can with images, with videos, with captions and image descriptions as well. It's important that you talk and listen to your disabled visitors and employees as well. They're going to be your best guide. I know you've got a session later on today about creating panels, and make sure that they are intersectional, that you have got a good representation of different disabled people on there that live with different conditions and impairments, that come from different communities, that have lots of different identities as well. Because what could tend to happen in this space, and what I see a lot of, is whoever's voice is the loudest take up the space. So make sure that you're actively going out of your way to encourage people to get involved, and also try and pay people for their time as well. It's really important that we don't expect disabled people to do this work for free, because your education isn't somebody else's burden. I think it's important as well to appoint a senior champion for disability inclusion in your organisation. Make sure this is a senior person, and by doing this, you're then going to get greater visibility of disability inclusion across your organisation. It's going to be brought up in meetings and, at board level, where other people that may be responsible for disability inclusion, they may not be privy to those conversations or those spaces. And also it might help you get greater access to funding and resources as well. So don't overlook what that is and what that can be for you. And lastly, I guess when it comes to making sure you're removing barriers for your disabled employees, you need to equip your line managers, because line managers are a really important relationship, employment relationship. They can make or break someone's employment experience. And I've had personal experience of that. So, if you expect your line managers to know about disability inclusion, you need to give them training and keep it current. They need to know, how do you implement a workplace adjustment? Where do they go? They need to know the boring stuff about procurement. They need to know what that process looks like. So, you can't expect people to behave inclusively, but then not set them up for success. It's important that we give line managers all the information and all the guidance and support that they need to do this, to do their job as a line manager to the best of their ability. So I just want to leave you with a challenge, and with this final thought that literally every decision that we make can either raise or lower barriers to participation in society. And my question to you all, and my challenge to you all is what action are you going to take? Because I think the biggest con of experiencing disability is always being expected to remove the barriers that we didn't put there. So don't see what you do as just your job. It's also your responsibility. Just remember all the great things that Sam shared before I spoke. Think about your spaces are places where people come for refuge. They come to make memories. We come to learn. Generally, cultural spaces and museums and galleries physically tend to be accessible. So there might be a choice, a purposeful choice to be there and meet there. but make sure that everything else about that experience is accessible as well. I'm going to stop now. I'm going to pause here for questions, thoughts or comments, and nothing is off limit. I'm going to stop sharing.
That's absolutely amazing. Thanks so much, Shani. You said so many, well, so much resonates with me, but so many one-liners. Oh, that's brilliant, that's brilliant. And I'm ashamed to say the one that's just stuck in my head was like, oh my goodness, is the dog coats one. It's like, it's like, isn't that bonkers? But doesn't that just show, how much of accessibility inclusion is market driven in terms of, instead of coming from an authentic place? We have got 5 minutes, so I know there's some questions that popped up, and I was so concentrating on listening to you because it's wonderful. Thank you so much.
Sure. And I can stay a bit longer as well if you're
brilliant, thanks. So Rebecca, let's if I can hand to you, other sort of,
don't worry, I was keeping track of them, Sam, so
okay, thank you.
so you could listen, and there's been lots, but I'm just gonna, there's two that are very similar. I'm gonna just shorten them slightly for time's sake, but basically both from people who identify as disabled. So as a disabled person in an organisation, how can you firstly stop all the kind of EDI stuff being put on you, and also avoid being pigeonholed into sort of maybe projects that are just focused on disability, rather than able to work on things you actually maybe are more interested in. If you wouldn't mind.
This is a great question. Yeah, and I'm experiencing the same actually in the broadcasting industry. Everybody only wants to ever book me to talk about disability. So it's a common thing that happens to disabled people. And isn't it bizarre? Like, there's so much more to us than just living with a condition or an impairment. And that's what people really need to remember as well. And just because we live with our conditions, we are not experts in every other condition and impairment out there. And it's wrong to think that people are. It's a huge burden to carry. So what I would suggest is just constantly, what I do is I'm always reminding people. And I know it sounds really simple, but sometimes people are making assumptions about us. So it's important to just give that gentle nudge, just give that gentle reminder. This could be in a formal way. You could create a time to talk about your line manager with this. It could be perhaps in, an annual review or a team meeting. Or, it could be in a really informal way as well. There are lots of different ways to kind of have this conversation. But I personally, how I manage it is by talking about it regularly, making sure that if I'm having a conversation, even if it's just a quick check-in before I'm due to go into a studio, I'm like, yeah, and don't forget that I want to talk more than just about disability. So I try and use, I try and bring, humor into it as well. But it's important because if disabled people only talk about disability, it's going to be really boring. Be more creative. You are the creative industry and sector. It should, and I always say this to like the built environment folk as well. Like, this should be easy for you. Don't make it harder than it needs to be. I think that's what I've got to say on that.
Great. There's also a really nice question that I think would be possibly a nice way to end as well, which is, let me find it. Sorry. I've lost myself in my own Word document, saying what is your favourite access provision you or someone you care about has ever experienced in a public leisure space or museum?
Okay,
that sparked joy.
Yeah, okay. Well, on Monday I visited the People's History Museum. I went to check out the exhibition called Nothing About Us Without Us, and I think it's like the first exhibition I've ever been to that's about disability rights and history, and I loved it. It was fascinating, but also it was super accessible. I loved the fact that there were QR codes everywhere that then gave access to audio description and BSL interpreted content, and I've never seen that before. And I want to take this opportunity to say, don't just do that for exhibitions and material that is related to disability. We as disabled people also enjoy non-disability related topics too. So that should be your standard practice with everything that you do. Personally, for me, I love it when I'm able to access accessible parking. Now, I live in London, and a lot of the galleries and museums here, you have to kind of pre-book. And I understand why, because there is such limited parking. But it just adds more life admin to me as a disabled person. So I would love it if I didn't have to do that. And let's say if all the accessible bays were booked, I would expect that venue to be flexible and to make a standard bay accessible for me as well, because why should I be limited because you might only have 2 accessible bays? So what I'm trying to say is be flexible. The thing that I think disables me the most is when people don't apply discretion or flexibility to policies. Don't think that you don't have the discretion to do that, you do. And that really helps to change people's perceptions about the accessibility of your spaces as well.
I think you're absolutely right, Shani. This is everyday stuff for everyone, and it's also perhaps worth shutting or closing this really inspiring talk by reminding people, as you've talked about intersectionality, that out of all of the protected characteristics, I think we're right in saying disability is the only one that anyone could wake up tomorrow suddenly finding themselves in. And I think when you make it relatable to everybody, it is everybody's not just right thing to do. You should want to be doing it because it can affect anyone and anyone's lives.
Sam, you're absolutely right. And look, if we think about sort of the D&I agenda, disability is always seen as the poorest sibling in the conversation. It's always the most overlooked, even though it's the largest diversity strand in the world. But really, the disability community is the essence of diversity, because everybody else is in that community as well. So really, we should be prioritizing disability inclusion, because by default, you're removing barriers for everybody else.
That's amazing. Thank you so much. And I'm hoping Michael Powell's on the call already. He's going to be talking later. Program lead for Nothing About Us Without Us. So I'm sure there were some rosy cheeks there. I hope so. He's blushing on the call. Thank you so much, Shani. That was incredible. And every day is a school day. Well, actually, not a school day. I hated school. Every day is a learning day for me. It's just great to hear.
Thanks. And just to say that, if anyone's got any questions, wants to follow up with anything, wants to just sense check anything, just feel free to reach out to me. I'm not going to charge you or anything.
That's really
happy to help. Yeah, happy to help. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for coming. Thanks for extending your wealth of information. It's just wonderful in lived experience. We're just going to have now, Rebecca, are we still going to have, is it a 10-minute break? We're still okay for a 10-minute break? Comfort break.
Yeah, I think so. So we're just
let's think we've used up some of minute 7. So let's take it from 12:08, come back at 18 minutes past 12, go and see some outdoor space if you can, make yourself a cup of tea, all the usuals. See you in a bit. Thank you. Hi, so welcome back everybody. Hopefully everyone is back and feeling refreshed, had a cup of tea, stretch your neck about, kind of moving around, that kind of thing. We're going to be going now to our first panel discussion, which is a bit different to what we've just been having, and really great because this panel discussion is going to be talking about setting up disability advisory panels. And what I really like about the programme, particularly for today, is very practical. So you're going to be getting lots of practical tips from people who have done this work themselves. So I'm just going to quickly introduce our 3 panelists for this first discussion. We have Barry Ginley, who is the Chief Executive Officer at Tamzone Consulting, which specialises in disability and inclusion. Good morning, Barry. He is also the chair of the Horniman Museum and Gardens Access Advisory Group, and previously worked at the V&A, where he led on the museum strategy to increase participation for underrepresented audiences. We also have Michael Powell, good morning Michael, who, as I've already said, is the programme lead for Nothing About Us Without Us at the People's History Museum, an exhibition exploring the history of disabled people's activism, which was co-curated by 4 community curators. And last but not least, we have Laura McSorley, who is an independent curator and organiser, currently working alongside as a creative practitioner, in Dundee Heritage Trust. Welcome everybody. Really looking forward to hearing from you. I guess if we could just start maybe in that order. So Barry first, then Michael, and then Laura. If you would like to just give us a few minutes each about why you're doing this work, the background of how you come to be doing this work, and also explain what you're currently working on with disabled panels or committees. So Barry, would you like to start, please?
Okay, sure. Thank you, Rebecca. Yes, so I've been involved in sort of museum accessibility since sort of the late 1990s, working on focus groups. And so, for example, the first access group I attended was with Tate Modern before it opened. And that sort of then led me to my work with the V&A and setting up the V&A's access group. And then over time, I've gone more into consultancy, where at the moment I'm, as Rebecca said, chair of the Horniman Museum and Gardens Access Group. But I also sit on other external and non-sort of museum-specific panels. So for the Built Environment Access Panel for Network Rail, and also for London Legacy Development Corporation, who manage the Queen Elizabeth Olympic Park. So that's sort of me, sort of in summary. But my day-to-day work really is access auditing of sites, venues, and assisting organisations in becoming sort of more disability confident.
Great, thank you. Michael?
Yeah, hello everyone. So yeah, my name is Michael Powell. My pronouns are he and him, and I'm to describe myself, I'm a balding white male with a beard, one of those, wearing headphones as well. Yeah, I'm the program lead for Nothing About Us Without Us at People's History Museum, and one of the project leads working on an exhibition project which we've been developing since 2018 at People's History Museum, exploring the history of the disabled people's movement in Britain. That was curated by 4 researcher community curators who all identify as disabled people, and also guided by a steering group of disabled people and non-disabled allies who've been working on for over 4 or 5 years. I'd just like to thank Shani for the kind words before. I'm still blushing from that. And just to also say that the level of access production done for the exhibition is now the benchmark for all content produced for future exhibitions at the museum, and for when the main galleries will be redeveloped, which is kind of in the pipeline as well. So it's kind of, this exhibition's been the kind of that catalyst for developing those processes as well and embedding them in the organisation. And then lastly, I'm currently working on an events program and a smaller exhibitions program that links to Nothing About Us Without Us over the next year.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Michael. And isn't that wonderful to hear that you actually, that's embedded change now throughout the whole organisation through the positive practice that you've just done. That's great. That's wonderful to hear, and hopefully will inspire others to do the same after this talk today. Thank you. Laura, would you like to tell us what you're doing, please?
Hi, I'll just describe myself quickly. I'm a white woman with long blonde hair, and I look a little bit nervous because there's loads of you on this call today. I'm currently working with Dundee Heritage Trust, who are custodians of Verdant Works, which is a mill museum, and the RRS Discovery, which was one of the early explorations of Antarctica. So we're working with a group of young people specifically related to the polar collection to think about climate change and how it is affecting people now. So that's the project that we're doing, and I guess we'll get more into that. Yeah, we're specifically working with young and disabled people to do this work, and I'm excited to tell you all more about it.
That's wonderful. Thank you as introductions. So I guess I've got one of my questions here. Myself and Rebecca have come up with some questions for you first, and then we will, I promise you all guys, leave enough time for questions to come from the delegates today as well. Do you think, the 3 of you, are you using particular sort of models of working, would you say, as practice? So I see Laura is nodding. Laura, do you just want to go first, and then maybe Barry, Michael, jump in if you recognise different models of practice that you are using currently? Thank you.
No, I was really excited to share about this today because when we were recruiting our group, we went through like more of a social prescription model. So we got in touch with lots of organisations in Dundee that are already working with young people and disabled people to see if anyone would be interested in joining this group, which will feed into like some new gallery development specifically, which was a really great way to not only connect with other organisations in the city, but to recruit our group. And there's just been this wonderful like layer of additional support that comes with working with organisations that are already doing the work. You know, we're not trying to reinvent the wheel. We're just supporting them in the work that they do through this project as well. And it made for like an amazing diverse group of young people that didn't know each other as well, which was exciting.
That's fabulous. And so the organisations themselves that were the social prescribers, did they become stakeholders in the project as well, or were they just conduits for the? Okay, great.
Yeah, they well, the organisations involved also provided myself as a creative practitioner with lots of training prior to starting the meetings with the groups, and they're also there as additional support whenever is needed, and hopefully we can carry on that relationship with any other projects in the future as they kind of unfold, to carry on the relationship of working together and getting the young people involved in these organisations also involved in the museum as well.
That's fantastic. I promise I'll come back to Barry and Michael in a minute. So many questions now. So interesting. I don't know how yours was funded, this project, but was that an aspiration? Did you put in your funding application, if you went external for funding, that was the process you were going in? You had identified those partners before. Was that something that came after when you knew you were going to be doing the project?
Yeah, it came after actually. The funding was actually secured for the project quite a while ago. And I think a mixture of the pandemic and catching up and staff teams changing over meant that the project was actually supposed to be 3 years long and had to be reduced to 18 months. So it has meant that we've had a bit of a luxurious time with spending the funds. So for example, whenever we get together, so we're talking about removing barriers. We've tried to remove as many barriers as possible. Most of them are actually financial. So every time we get together, everyone's transport is paid, whether that's bus, taxi, whatever form that takes, we will pay for that. We always have a hot meal before we start our discussions or whatever we're doing, so make sure everyone's got a full belly, because that's you can't really get creative if you're hungry. And everyone who comes is remunerated and receives a stipend every time they come to a session. So it just removes, again, because we're asking for input into the museum. You know, I'm being paid to be there. Why should my group members not be paid to be there as well?
That's a really good point, and something that Shani not just alluded to, but actually expressed as well. I think as well, just it's worth raising, and then I promise I'll come to you next, Barry, actually. I think it's worth raising as well, just to be mindful that financial monetary payment isn't always necessarily the most ideal thing for someone. As odd as that might sound, that can potentially impact on someone's benefits, rights and stuff. So asking what's right for people first. Thank you, Laura. Barry, do you work in any particularly other different kind of model of practice at all?
Well, it's fairly similar. However, what we tend to do is recruit from known museum users and also non-users, because I found in the past that the way regular users will use the museum will be completely different to first-timers. So we like to try and get a full breadth of experience from the panel. And just agreeing with Laura that you know, we also do provide sort of payments and travel, and also pay for sign language interpretation, etc. So people can fully participate. And again, having that discussion with the panel members, because if some people are on benefits, then obviously a payments is you know, could jeopardize some of those payments. So it is having those conversations.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Barry. How do you actually recruit non-visitors already? Then I'm intrigued.
It's sort of advertising in local media or approaching sort of user-led organisations in the local area.
Brilliant. Okay.
So, you know, specifically going to, if you like, the groups that, you know, have the knowledge.
Fantastic. That's great. I love it as well that, and I guess, Michael, are you okay? You're still there?
I am. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. That's absolutely fine. It's all right. I'm coming to you next as well. That's brilliant. Again, similar similar process or model for how you've started this work?
No, in a sense, but slightly different as well. Sorry if people can't see my video at the moment, it kind of just loaded off and on. So I'm currently a blank screen, but as long as you can hear me, that's the main thing.
We can hear you, that's absolutely fine. Yeah, if you could explain, your process, that'd be great, thank you.
So I guess our process has developed over a few different projects across previous programs, working with different kind of groups of people to tell different stories. Just to explain, as People's History Museum, we've got an approach where we don't have a set curator who works at the museum, but we have a core programming team who work across exhibitions, events, learning programs. And then we always try to work with different communities and individuals to tell different stories and histories. So Nothing About Us Without has developed kind of out of a project in 2018 that was based around the Representation of the People Act and the anniversary of that, the anniversary of some women getting the right to vote. And we decided to co-produce a kind of a month-long exhibition working with Greater Manchester Coalition of Disabled People around the representation of disabled people as part of that project. And through that, we set up a voluntary steering group of kind of GMCP staff and members to kind of help guide that process and to think about kind of what Shani was mentioned before, kind of the intersectionality of that group and who are the organisations and the groups of people who aren't being represented, and who should we be talking to kind of bring that to kind of widen that conversation. And our steering group and our project developed from there, really, and in a bit more of an organic way, in that we did another exhibition beyond that, because the first exhibition had so much take up and a good reaction from a wide audience that we kind of did another month-long exhibition, working with that steering group, but also kind of bringing kind of new members in. And I guess the other thing to add is that we were very clear, the members were very clear from the beginning that, you know, we're working with disabled people's organisations, and that the social model of disability is at the core of the project and the process. And we kind of got in touch with different organisations and different people through that group to bring other members along. And then we, following that, we kind of evaluated it and we formalised it, thinking about how to develop that into a bigger programme and a bigger exhibition over the next year or so. I think it's to be so all our steering group members are volunteers who have been working on that project. Most of them come through organisations that they work for, and that's an ongoing conversation we've had, responding to kind of different talking about payment with those members, and that we cover travel, we cover any access requirements such as PA support for that group, and we provide refreshments. But through working with that group, we kind of decided what we wanted to do for the project was to kind of apply for funding and to make sure that we appointed 4 members of staff at the museum as kind of paid PHM staff members, who all identified as disabled people, to be the researchers and the curators for the project, and kind of and involved a selection of steering group members in that shortlisting and interview process for those job roles as well. And those 4 curators have kind of been working at the museum now for over 2 years as staff on this project.
That's brilliant, thank you. And so in terms of actual payment, because I know Barry and Laura alluded to how they remunerate people's time. Obviously the people who are employed is a bit different, but the other members who are coming into that, how do you manage that one? How do we manage that?
So it's an individual conversation with each member. It's kind of like Barry and Laura. It's kind of and with each curator, when we approached how we pay the curators for the roles of staff, some of the curators are on payroll, some are on a more freelance model, because again, it's kind of thinking about people's individual circumstances. we like the last thing we'd ever want to do is affect anyone's kind of welfare support. And so we've kind of taken it on a case-by-case basis with people and kind of had a bit of an open conversation as we do that.
That's brilliant, and it's lovely to show very clearly that that can be done, can't it? And yeah, I mean, I think there'll be quite a few people on the call who I've already seen in the chat how long it even takes to be able to access you know, the benefits that people are entitled to. It just, you certainly don't want to threaten those. How often do you all guys meet? So Michael, if we start with you, seeing as you're unmuted at the moment anyway, how often are you meeting as a group?
I might have got my video back. So we are a steering group. Our steering group meets once a month, and it has met once a month since 2017, pretty much. We actually met more during the earlier period of the pandemic, through to people wanted to meet more, and we went to bi-weekly meetings, and then changed back when it became that Zoom overload period. But yeah, we once a month, and then as curators we meet once a week on a Monday at 11, and have done for about 15-16 months whilst delivering and developing the project, you know.
That's great. And I guess actually during the pandemic as well, it's a way of, it's a well-being thing, isn't it? Just meeting other people, even if it is online as we're doing now. There was that period of weirdness where we were all sort of cast off, and I think yeah, it's a lot of common ground being felt with other organisations, or just keeping in connectivity with humans, even if it's online like this, is really great. Laura, how often do you guys sort of meet? What's your schedule look like?
We meet fortnightly, and that's planned in for about 13 months, started in January. Hopefully we'll carry on pending funding. But yeah, it's really great. And sometimes we meet on the off weeks if there's participants who want to like finish off if something started the week before. I'll just arrange for, you know, the same room to be available, and we'll still get together, and you know, if that's what is needed that week, which is quite nice.
That's lovely. It's lovely to hear the flexibility of both of your groups too. And Barry, is it similar sort of for you? How often does your group meet, or do you meet when you need to meet for a project coming up?
We meet quarterly, generally in person, but there have been times recently, because the museum has the Nature and Love project being developed to develop the gardens and natural history gallery. We've actually met sort of more regularly to go through the different design plans for each of the gardens and the gallery. So, and then as and when needed, we may get sort of contacted sort of at short notice about a sort of an individual project. So, but generally it's quarterly that we'll meet.
Okay, that's great. So the next question, which I think came from Rebecca, which is a really good one, is about meaningful difference, isn't it? So I think potentially there's a risk. I've been part of advocacy, I can't even say it, access groups as a parent with Lucy, and I think there's a real risk, isn't there, or has been in the past with some places where it can feel tokenistic or very much just project led. And once that organisation's got the information, it's dropped because, you know, they needed it for a funding application or something. So I guess the question is, and we'll come round, Barry, if you're happy to start next, your advice that you would give to ensure that groups are given the opportunity to make a meaningful difference. So the groups that you're working with, particularly on this, how do they know they're making a meaningful difference, and how do you feed that back to them as well? Please.
Okay, so for us at the Hornham, we have buy-in from the board. So we have a board's director that attends our meetings, as well as sort of the chief executive. So, for example, we have a meeting next week where the chief executive is coming to present the equity and diversity action plan for the next 3 years. So it's ensuring that you know, everybody from the top down in the museum and also the bottom up in the museum sort of interact with the group, and also seeing the whole range of staff throughout the museum actually sort of gives the group confidence that they're actually being listened to. And also seeing the results come through our projects. So, for example, we had significant input into the World Gallery when that has been redeveloped. That opened in 2018. And as part of that whole process, the Access Advisory Group were able to choose objects which related to them and also their disabilities. And initially that display was going to be just a temporary part of the gallery, but now it's been made a permanent part. So for outcomes such as that sort of really gives members confidence that they are actually being listened to.
Thank you, Barry. I'm really pleased as well that you've mentioned about the sort of linear. It's difficult, isn't it? The bottom up, top, bottom, whatever. But anyway, the process of what role you are within a museum, because I often say this with my SEND training, viewing SEND inclusion or any inclusion as a stick of rock in the front of house, the pointy end of the team, so to speak. I say, the people that actually visitors are going to interact with need to be as signed up and signed in and on board as the people at, if you like, the other end of the stick of rock or the top of your organization, who are perhaps more of the influencers, the budget holders and the decision makers. And if there's any break in that stick of rock where it doesn't say inclusion or access or SEND, then you've got a problem, haven't you? Because it needs to be continuous through. So whole organizational buy-in is absolutely it. Thank you so much, Barry. Laura, if I could ask the same sort of question to you, to just remind you again, how do they know, how does your group know that they're making a meaningful difference in the work that they're doing with you?
I just kind of want to echo what Barry said. It's about like seeing themselves reflected in the museum and having ownership over, like something that's happened because of a decision that they've made or come together. We've got a couple of public outcomes coming up this summer, which are really exciting, and I just can't wait to see how that transforms or catalyzes the group in how they feel about the input that they have. We've done some evaluation, and it's nice when they say, I feel like my voice is heard here. But it's also about like governance, like you say. It's eventually we're thinking about how to get young people and disabled people on the board, and also when roles come up in the museum, encouraging people from my group to possibly work in the museum or work in a different museum, or do they want to go to art school, or I'm there to support. We're there to support all of the additional things around this project as well, and their ambitions outside of the group, and not just to do with being in the museum. We want to see them flourish in all aspects of their lives, and I think that's it's good to be aware of how to, I guess it's almost like a pastoral care thing as well, like thinking about how to support someone's needs out with what you're just doing in that room, and seeing themselves reflected and not feeling like they're not really having a say, which I think is good.
I think that's brilliant. And also you've answered that in the opposite way as well, how you have a meaningful impact on their lives too, isn't it? That's not just them having a meaningful, making their mark within your space, your museum space, but enriching their lives obviously through working with you. Thank you, Laura.
It's a lot of trust, I think, is needed both ways.
Yeah, there is, isn't there? And the development of that relationship as you're going through. It's you're right, trust is a good word. Michael, could I ask you the same, please?
Yeah, that kind of echo that. I think trust is key, and like time, like building in time into projects or to things that allow those meaningful relationships to build, and that the process behind them reflects that. So just to share with everyone, like the exhibition we developed, we actually delayed twice and pushed the dates back upon like reflecting on the fact that the process we were working through would be jeopardized by meeting the deadlines we'd initially set. One of those reasons was responding to kind of COVID last winter and meeting online, and we kind of had a July launch date for the exhibition. It just felt like we weren't honoring. If we were to deliver that, we wouldn't be honoring the way we wanted to do it. And that was this kind of making sure that the initial ideas of steering group members and the new ideas of curators were kind of balanced, and kind of those conversations were properly held, and that everyone felt involved. And then latterly, as we got further down the line, we delayed it again because the volume of loans we were getting for the exhibition, lots of them were from individual lenders, who, partly due to COVID, lots of disabled people's organisations had moved remotely, and lots of objects and things that people had weren't accessible for people to get and give us accurate measurements in the timeframes our designers wanted in order to design up the exhibition. So again,
always those pesky designers, isn't it? Sorry, I'm jumping in there.
No.
Bugbear of mine.
Yeah, but to be that, yeah, there it is. But they were flexible as well. But it was also like, it was something we hadn't thought of, and I don't think could have really thought of until we knew like what was coming. But it was something, I think the key is responding to that, and we wanted to really kind of make sure that, again, we didn't want to cut anything because of those time frames, because that would kind of, again, it was about building trusting relationships, not just with people we're working more directly with, but with people we potentially loaning really personal objects from, you know. So again, we
you dropped out a bit there,
to a November deadline,
okay,
from what was an October deadline, which our comms team, you know.
Is Michael dropping out for everyone else a little bit? Yeah, okay. Sorry, Michael, you've dropped out a bit, but I'm really interested. Can
you hear me now?
I can hear you now. Yeah. You're still there, okay?
I'm sorry, my internet is being funny today, but if you can hear me.
I can hear you now, yeah.
Yeah, it was just, so I think the main thing is about honouring the process and making sure that, and kind of building those and maintaining those trusting relationships is key. And it's kind of like to making people feel involved in the projects, and also like beyond that across the organisation, you know, even down to kind of launch event planning. We had steering group members and curators involved in meetings, kind of guiding that process, thinking of kind of smaller details, suggested ideas that why the team, and also interacting and meeting people who they weren't directly working as closely with across the organisation, who I don't often work that, you know. So kind of like, again, it was kind of about fostering that relationship and embedding it a bit more, which then we had senior leadership team and trustee buy into this process, but it was kind of making sure the whole organisation could get behind this project as well, to kind of help engender that kind of a cultural shift, which we're not there yet, but we're you know, like, I think the main thing is we're trying to get there, and it's trying to remove as many barriers as possible as some of those barriers are presented, even if we've not thought of them or kind of considered them, and then they kind of someone, you know, so we're trying to, I think it's about flexibility as well, you know.
It sounds like a very organic process you're all working with, which is it needs to be, doesn't it? Because like you say, you can't possibly know at the beginning what the end result is going to be. I'm very much about process in a lot of the work that I talk about, even if it's kids' activities on a Sunday, coming to your museum a bit, enjoying and valuing the process and not necessarily the end result. But there is that, I use it in a non-religious term, faith that one has to have as a group in each other, isn't it? And that wherever that journey is that goes to at the end will be the place it's supposed to be. You've made the right journey together collectively. That's magical. It's lovely to hear that this is, I guess, projects like this, particularly the longer term ones. So the next question we had was about how to avoid being exploitative and or short term. But from what I'm hearing from all three of you is that actually to make real change in an organisation, a whole organisation, as Barry quite rightly and well, all of you have pointed out, it needs to be everybody involved. And Michael, I like how you brought people in. So they've got the practical, it might be something really practical, mightn't it? Like how to bring in a particular object, how to look after an object, which you might not know unless you're in the curatorial or conservation sort of side of things. So everybody bringing in their knowledge and expertise into it and feeling involved from the early set, even if you're not like on the project team, so to speak. But then you get the ownership, you get natural buy-in. That people are humanly we're just humans, aren't we? Just want to be able to, be involved in something. And then we have an investment in it, a personal investment. So in terms of, it doesn't sound like any of your work is short term, but have any of you got any tips on how to say there was a museum that was never done anything like this before, and to do things at the level that you're talking about, which is obviously achievable, but quite aspirational if you've never done it before. How do you avoid becoming short term? How do you start small and build? Laura, you're nodding enthusiastically. Can you answer that, please?
I mean, I came into this project, it was kind of already applied for and kind of designed a little bit before I came in, but like I was just thinking about constantly sharing what you're up to with your team. Like every time my group meets, I send like pictures and loads of words to my line manager. And I'm like, oh, it's amazing, it's so fun. And it's like sharing that excitement to get everyone on board, but also like I'm constantly thinking about evaluation and documenting every single thing that we do, taking notes, taking pictures, you know, trying to measure those like intangible things that are really hard to, you know, to put in an evaluation form. But like the things that are hard to describe, like the, you know, the way that's made someone feel, for example, or the way it's changed someone's week or month or year, or, you know, it depends how that is, and constantly thinking about how to keep it going. So like right now I'm about halfway through my project, but I'm already thinking about how it's going to extend further than the 18-month point, or, you know, if that's not going to be me that carries on, who's that going to be? Is there a legacy? Can I train someone to do my job? Because it's very like specific, like thinking about that kind of like being a ligament between the organization and your group, and like being flexible and making space for accessibility. Because quite a lot of organizations do say they are accessible, but, you know, then set hard deadlines for, I don't know, someone with ADHD who can't meet hard deadlines and doesn't work like that and needs, you know, a different kind of support. So yeah, it's about thinking about next year, like always thinking forward, as well as like being very present at the moment, which is quite hard to do. But it's
I love that what you just said about being the ligament. I think that's just fantastic.
that's how like I see myself sometimes. I'm like, I don't know, my dad asked me, like, what do you do? And I was like trying to describe it to him, and I was like, that's what I do.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it's about being really flexible in all of your approaches. I totally agree with what Michael was saying.
And actually, from what you've all, I'm just going to put it to the floor in a minute so that there is enough time to take questions, because I've seen loads popping up. So we'll do that in a minute. I think we're kind of out of our questions anyway that Rebecca and I come up with. But you're all very flexible, and it is what's come from is a very sort of human approach, which sounds obvious to say, but making organizations, some of them very big organizations that could potentially be, one could argue, intimidating as big sort of, I don't know, throwing it out there maybe, but actually making them very humanized, and sort of doesn't really matter the scale of your organization realistically, does it? It's just making a start. Thank you so much. Time just vanishes, doesn't it? But Rebecca, do we have any questions that you could direct, please, from the call to anyone in particular? Michael, I guess you're still there, even though we can't see you.
Yes, I'm still here.
Perfect, thank you.
That's good to know. There's a really interesting question actually that I suppose it's not particularly necessarily about sort of steering groups, but I think you'd all have an opinion on it. I'm just going to shorten it for time's sake, but it's basically sort of how do we hold, should we and can we hold organisations accountable for embedding equality, diversity and inclusion, and making workplaces more accessible? Because although funders may have requirements, I think the person asking the question said in their lived experience that just doesn't happen. And yeah, just be great to get your thoughts on that, and perhaps maybe sort of refer it back to how people you work with can help that change happen, if that's okay and makes sense.
Laura, would you like to unmuted?
So I think unfortunately it does come down to people, visitors, audience members, people at work actually shouting about the issues. Like I know what we were talking about earlier was like maybe some people are non-visible disabilities or don't want to share like their disability with the world, but unfortunately, unless you kind of make a song and a dance, people won't make the change unless they feel like it's impacting their audiences and the people that are coming into their museums. Like nothing's going to happen. Not nothing. People are definitely trying to make things happen, but when there's an external pressure like kind of cooking up, I think that's like a really like important thing. And like also like to encourage like a bit of like an anarchist approach maybe to these things. Sending a tweet can be really powerful. If you went somewhere and you had a bad experience, and just tweeting the director of the organization can make a huge impact, because that's going to go top down and they're going to start asking questions about why someone's tweeting them. And I've seen it happen before. So I think, I encourage my group to be really vocal about their opinions, and I'm constantly asking them, is this feeling good? Is this feeling right? Is there something we can do differently to make this better or more comfortable or open it up in a way? And like constantly, like being flexible and asking those questions, I think is really important.
Thank you, Laura. So Barry or Michael, would you like to answer that, or Rebecca, have we got time for another question maybe? Or Michael, did you want to answer that?
I was just going to build upon what Laura said. I think it's just kind of like advocating. I think advocating for transparency as well is quite a good thing, like as a staff member, but also as an audience member or stakeholder. And I think something we try to do it, but it's kind of like, you know, we commissioned a new access audit prior to this whole program. So now it's like, how do we, as part of the exhibition funding, we've managed to secure capital funding for changes to the building, out of an acknowledgement that, you know, a new building that was made 10 years ago is fairly good from a physical access impairment perspective, but from a sensory perspective is rubbish and there's lots of changes that have been identified that weren't thought of 10 years or should have been thought of that aren't there. And it's now like, so as the next stage of work for us, it's making sure we deliver on the findings of that access audit, which was done by Manchester Disabled People's Access Group. So it's a disabled persons organisation that led it. They're very experienced in doing it. And my role currently is kind of making sure I'm sharing out what we're doing to deliver on that and kind of involving curators, other stakeholders in that process. But I think transparency was the thing I just wanted to mention. I think
transparency and trust. We need to find a third word. Barry, have you got that third word? If it begins with a T,
Yes.
all the better, because I like consistency.
Actually, it begins with an L, and it's legislation, the Equality Act, and also for publicly funded museums, they have a responsibility under the public sector equality duty to spend the public money that they receive for all members of the public, not those that already have the opportunity to go to museums. So the Equality Act is a key tool to drive some success. It's not the only one, and we've heard how other drivers can help with that, but first and foremost is legislation.
You're absolutely right, Barry, and we shouldn't really need to say anything else, really, to be honest. I mean, I'm not saying we finished here, but you're absolutely right. I do remember standing up in a conference about 4 years ago where a poor fairly youngish learning person had said, well, how can I, it's all great with this SEND stuff. It was a SEND conference, but how can I convince my directors? And I stood up and very vocally said, it's the Equality Act. There was a word used, didn't begin with T actually. Anyway, have we got any other questions, Rebecca, before we go off for a much needed lunch break and conjugation? Oh, mute.
Sorry. This might be a question that's a bit too long to get into, but it's aimed at Michael, but I think it's relevant to Laura and Barry too, about finding funding, and whether you have any, I suppose, reading between the lines, is recommendations for where to find funding for this sort of work. If you're able to signpost at all.
It's a range of funding, I guess. I think it's less about funding, it's more about I think it's partnerships, and through forming those partnerships, you kind of, because this project has been, there's a lot of National Lottery Heritage funding in the exhibition project, but there were lots of smaller pots of funding we got to develop it as we went along, which were based upon conversations we had with different partners or people that we're working with, and that our head of development, who I think the great thing about this project is just to recognise that although myself and my colleague Mark have been kind of developing it and kind of leading it over the last few years, most of our senior managers have been involved with steering group meetings and come along to those meetings to get a kind of to get to know people, but also to kind of like get ideas for who to talk to or the strands of funding to aim at. And I think so kind of having different people thinking about that has really helped as well. So that would be, I think partnerships are key, I think, and kind of making sure that people across the organisation are kind of involved in thinking about the development of the project to help shape it.
Thank you. Barry, have you got an answer for that quickly, please?
Yeah, for me, it's core funding from organisations. When I was at the V&A and I put in a request to set up our access group as part of our disability action plan, and it was essential that the museum provided core funding as opposed to looking externally, because I find that when it is core funded, the museum actually takes more ownership of the group and the decisions that come from that group.
100%, and I think it's about time this sector realised that it's not just down to charities, and you know, you have responsibilities, as you said with the legislation. It's a business core budget line that should be embedded, even if it's ring fenced and you think, well, what are we going to do with that? Let's look at that, ring fence it and budget it. There's people on the call that's your responsibility. Please make ownership of that today. We thank you so much to the speakers, so Michael, Barry and Laura. That's really insightful. We could have just done a whole day talking to you guys, couldn't we? It's wonderful. If you've got any other questions, keep them coming. We're going to go for an hour's long lunch break now, but I've got just as a little aside of something you can do to bring something of yourselves, because where apart from the questions we're only able to pick out a few, we're not really meeting you as much today as we would do if we were in person. So my invitation to you, and obviously if you're working from home, this is easier than if you're working at your desk in an office, is to bring back something with you after your hour-long lunch break. An object, just one object that has a personal meaning to you. It can be anything. It might be in your handbag or your desk drawer or something if you're not at home. And we will meet back here, unless you've got anything else to add, Rebecca, at 2 o'clock. Is that right?
No, just the meeting will stay open, so you can leave. I can re-admit you, or you can just turn your camera off and leave it running. Up to you.
Great. Have a good lunch, guys. Take care. Right, who makes it 2 o'clock? Hope you're all back. Hi. I hope you all had a restful lunch and didn't do any work actually, because today is about today and not necessarily just doing your day job as well. I know you'll all checked your emails. So one of my invitations to you was to find an object which meant something to you or had a personal meaning and bring it with you. Would you like to all hold your object up to the screen? You got one? Anyone do it? Someone brought their ironing board with them. No? Okay, Sarah from Whitby, you're going to have to could you please unmute and tell me what that is?
It's a surfboard.
Ah, yes. How domestic of me to think it was an ironing board. Sorry. It looks a very cool surfboard. What's the personal meaning behind that?
So the surfboard, I think it's from the late 60s, and it was the one my dad used to use, and we used to surf on it when we were kids at Whitby. It's not the first surfboard in Whitby, that's up on the other wall, but he decorated it, and he was, let's say, neurodivergent, so he's really into maths. So doing artwork was a big thing, because so he spent hours on it. And then we discovered a few years ago, my granddad had painted the entire thing orange. So I've been through and taken the orange off to reveal the paint. So it's sort of a special connection between all the history, and to me, it sort of almost smells of the sea and going surfing and down the beach. So
yes,
it's a special.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing that, Sarah, and apologies for pouncing on you. But it was just, I saw the snake and I just thought, I love that. And how beautifully you've just illustrated as well that objects connect us with memories and meaning. And you've also just said, which is lovely on the sense side of things, a sensory thing. Maybe it does still smell of the sea, but the point is your memory is evocative of that sense of smell, and that's what you're bringing. I'll just quickly share mine and then we'll ask somebody else. So this, can you all see this little creature here? Is lovingly called Timmy. If any of those got children of a certain age, we will recognize him as a LeMay's brand Firefly. I'm just going to make a squeaky noise here now. He makes it squeak, it's got a little hip squeak. And this is important to me because Timmy is actually 13 and a half years old. He's the same age as my daughter. And my daughter didn't play with any object. He's the first object she played with when she was 6 months old. And it was on a very long journey up. My parents-in-law lived in Yorkshire, and it was the 6-hour journey up to Yorkshire. We did make stops, and my husband and I were just sort of driving up to Yorkshire, and we heard this tiny little crinkly noise. If I can find his crinkles, if you can hear that crinkle. Can you hear the crinkle in there? And that's all we heard, and we knew that was the moment where she had engaged with another object outside of her. So play as much as playing with toys. So hugely important. And he's also the go-to toy. So he was hanging up in the car actually for about 12 years until lockdown, maybe 11 years. And then he broke free. So his little tag on the top there, literally after 12 years, broke free. And he's now in the house. He's gone everywhere. He's even goes to all the medical appointments. He's even had an X-ray. So apologies to anyone in the NHS thinks that's a misuse of X-rays, but it was really fascinating at the time. So yes, don't objects hold a lot for us? Is there anybody else on the call who's Rebecca, I don't know where I've lost you where you are, but you might, I can't see all of you at once. So, okay, Stacey's holding up a mug. Stacey's from National Gallery. Would you like to tell us about the mug? You have to come on off mute, please. Thank you.
Hi. My mug is, it says, no, drinking this cure you found on Google will not cure me. Yeah, because people are very helpful. They love to offer me advice and they love to offer me cures, but I always try and be very funny about it. And this is actually a painting in my gallery.
Nice connection.
I know that facial expression because I wear it a lot.
Yes. Isn't it? How old is interesting? Yes, obviously the painting, and they've used that term on top of that painting, haven't they? As opposed to knowing that that's what the expression the person was actually pulling. That's great. Thank you so much. Thank you for the personal share. Anyone else got an object they'd like to hold? Hannah, you're kind of blurred, so I can't see. I know you're holding something, Hannah Scully.
I am. I'm not sure why I'm blurred.
Which is even more fascinating. So now you've really got to describe the object because I personally can't see it. So that's an interesting.
Who knows? Maybe I'll just have to do it verbally. It's a conservation packed salt and vinegar crisp from about oh God, how old am I now? A long time ago. So it does not smell like salt and vinegar anymore. But it was when I was being taught how to pack things for the Royal College of Surgeons odontological collection, their tooth collection move when they closed the Huntarian. I helped with that, and they taught us all how to pack crisps of our choosing, and I happened to pick this one, so it just sits on my shelf now.
That's nice, as a reminder of your past training.
I can pack things even if I'm not packing them right now.
Well done you for not eating them before you pack the packaging.
Oh God, you wouldn't want it now.
No, not now. Gillian Scotford, that's a very interesting, describe that object, please.
So this is something that I've not had very long, actually. And I was doing an audit, and someone, a young disabled girl was making these little objects, and they were selling them to raise money. And my son, Thomas, sadly passed away aged 21 when he'd had a major heart defect. And he needed caring for every single day, hoisting, changing places, seizures, you name it, he had it. And I always felt, because he couldn't speak, I always felt that we were kind of like one person. And I always said I felt like a jigsaw piece, and Tom was part of those jigsaw pieces. And I never went anywhere without thinking about him all the time. And so I felt that when I saw this, it kind of represented that kind of jigsaw piece of me and Tom together, because he's always in my heart every day. And whenever I deliver training, you know, I always think his needs were so severe that if someone could welcome Tom, they could welcome anybody. And so this is on my desk at work, and it only cost me £1, but it's very precious to me now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gillian, for sharing, and so sorry for your loss, but thank you for sharing that incredible journey. And wow, whenever I work with the AMA, actually, it's always very powerful stuff for the people that bring, and that's really resonated with me personally as a parent, and totally get that jigsaw bit. And do you remember what I said at the beginning about people with outspoken word or non-verbal, however you want to say it, that communicating with them isn't going to be as easy to access? Doesn't everybody, for me, Gillian has just expressed beautifully how absolutely she was her son's voice too. And why would anybody say any different to that? You powerfully have put that in words. Thank you so much, Gillian. So just, somebody's just spotlit me. So that means I can't see the rest of you. I'm just going to remove that spotlight. We've got a couple of more minutes before they start, I think. So people are coming up in the chat, which is great. But does anybody else, just while they're on screen, want to hold one more thing up? Otherwise we can start. If you're happy to start, that's fine. Okay, well, the reason why I got you to do that, partly because it's nice, isn't it nice? We wouldn't have heard those stories. And thank you so much to those people that have just shared that. That was really magical. I'll always remember those. But the point is as well, when we're coming into museum as a visitor, perhaps when we've been working in the sector for as long as we all have collectively, there's got to be about 1,000 years worth of experience on this call just here today. It's over 100 of you. Collectively, we sometimes forget that the importance of the object's not just an object is never just an object, is it? It's always locked up with the stories of the people that have used it, made it, touched it, curated it, you name it, and is then experiencing it in your setting for the first time, perhaps for a visitor. And so that magic, trying to get back in touch to that magic, which is everyday magic all around you with the objects around that resonate for you. And it's an individual resonance. So the stories of all the things we've held up just now were individual to us, but particularly good old Timmy here, who's actually called, he's just called, I don't know what it's actually called. He has got a name, actually, the brand name, the Firefly. You know, there'll be other people who's go, oh yeah, he's really important to me because, and they've linked their personal stories to their version of that object. Hopefully that was useful and food for thought to take with you as you go forward with this. So we're going to be talking now. We're going to be talking to two wonderful people who are going to talk to you about Curating for Change, which is a fantastic project, which I'm sure many of you on the call today have heard about, but everybody wants to learn more about. I'm going to introduce you to two people. The first one is Emily Goff, who is the project manager for Curating for Change. And the second person is Claudia Davies, who's a Curating for Change fellow from the Black Country Living Museum. Welcome.
You're on mute, Emily.
Hello. I think when I shared my screen, I couldn't find the unmute button. Thank you so much for that introduction, Sam. And yeah, I'm joined today by Claudia, who is one of our Curating for Change fellows. We've titled this session, We Are Not All the Same, because that is the title of our very first sector action plan, which is focusing on equitable recruitment within the museum sector. I had a quick flick through the delegates that are joining us today, and I could see that we also have another Curating for Change fellow that is joined on today, Amy. I'm not going to put you on the spot, Amy, but it's nice to have that support within the audience as well. And, you know, let me know if you do want to say a few words, put your hands up. I might draw on you later if you'd like to contribute. So without much more ado, I think it's probably best to say a little bit about ourselves. So I'd like to start off with a visual description of myself. So my name is Emily Goff and I'm the project manager for Curating for Change. I am a white woman in her mid-30s with long brown hair and a fringe. I'm wearing a pink striped shirt today and I have a white background behind me. I'd like to say very upfront, identify as non-disabled, and so I don't have that lived experience. So it's really important for me today to be joined by Claudia Davies. So I'll pass you on to her now to give a brief visual description.
Happy to meet you all. Thank you for joining on today. I am Claudia. I am the Curating for Change fellow. at the Black Country Living Museum. I am a white woman in her early 20s with blonde hair, a fringe, glasses, a white, pink, blue striped jumper, which I think you can only see the top half on camera. I also wear 2 hearing aids, so I am deaf, but they're covered up by my hair. And before I started this role, I was talking about university, so I did my undergrad in archaeology and anthropology at Durham University, and then I stayed on and did a master's in international cultural heritage management. So I sort of went straight in from doing my master's into this role, and it is my first sort of job in the museum sector, but also my first sort of adult job as well. So, yeah.
Thank you, Claudia. So Claudia and I will be co-inputting into the session today. You know, through my own lived experience, I can't fully represent the challenges and the benefits and opportunities that our approach to more equitable recruitment has had without having the input of the lived experience of Claudia. So I'm really pleased that she's able to join us today. As we go through today's presentation, there will be some time at the end for questions. So I think Rebecca has really kindly offered to monitor the chat. So if you have any questions, that can be our starter for 10 when we get to the question section at the end, which I think maybe Sam and Rebecca will chair for us. So you've got time to ask Claudia and I questions at the end. I'll be showing some pre-filmed content within this presentation that is all subtitled and BSL interpreted. So you might find that intersects with the closed captioning activated for this session. So just be aware of that. So what are we going to cover in our presentation? So we're going to be looking at equitable recruitment and why it's important and why it's necessary for the museum sector currently. We feel really strongly that you can't offer a fully inclusive practice without individuals with lived experience within the workplace and within museum roles. And for many, this is sort of challenging, and lots of our partner museums that have been involved with Curating for Change have felt that...
Sorry to interrupt, it's just Rebecca. Sorry, I think there's some tabs open on your computer, so it's just blocking out your slides. Okay. So sorry, I hate to interrupt you, it means we can't see everything. Can you?
That's funny, yeah. I had the participants in the meeting chat up, so I'll just close those down.
I know, it's annoying Zoom thing. Sorry to interrupt again.
Better.
It's still one over the top. Oh, yeah, there we go.
Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you. So, yeah, we're going to be looking at what is equitable recruitment and why is it necessary for the museum sector. We're going to be having a quick look at some of the toolkits that we recommend for introducing equitable recruitment practice in your organisation. We're going to be looking at how you can meet individuals' requirements once they are in role. There's going to be a brief moment for a bit of reflective practice, carving out some time in your diary next week, perhaps, to revisit our recommendations today, and opportunity to keep in touch with us, where to find out more, and things that we've got coming up for the programme in the not too distant future. And obviously, as well, there'll be some questions at the end. So first off, I'd like to introduce you to our Curating for Change Fellows. So this is 7 of our 8 Curating for Change Fellows, and this was taken at our residential in November last year at the Museum of London. So I will endeavour throughout this presentation to visually describe all the images that I include. So the image shows our Curating for Change Fellows. Starting from left, we have Suchitra Chatterjee seated in front. We have Amy Thraves-Connor stood behind. We have Jack Guy stood centrally. Then Claudia Davies, who you'll be hearing from in a minute. Then we have Amelia Silva, Iris Serendi, and then we have Carl Jordan's seated in front. And so they are all completing fellowships at our partner museums. And we actually have around 20 different partner museums across the country that are hosting some of our placements. So we have 8 curatorial fellowships, which are each 18 months. But we also hosted 8 40-day traineeships. So these were shorter placements for people who were sort of new to the museum sector. And most of those completed before Christmas last year. Our partner museums range in size and scope and contents. And that was really important for us because we wanted to show that whatever your size, whatever your type of museum, whatever your location, you can open up access to deaf, disabled and neurodivergent people in your workforce. So we've been working with council-run museums, national museums, local, local authority, independent, so a real breadth, and with some fantastic results. So I'm really pleased that Claudia will be able to share some of her experiences. So this is a disabled-led programme. So the head of Accentuate, whose brainchild this really was, Curating for Change, is Esther Fox. And she wasn't able to join us today, but I thought it would be really nice to play a little of her keynote from our first Curating for Change Sector Forum. And this really covers why equitable recruitment, what is equitable recruitment rather than equal opportunities, and why that is necessary for the workplace. So I'm just going to play a proportion of it. Do let me know, obviously, if you're having any issues hearing this or accessing it. Okay.
Why do we even need to rethink recruitment? Aren't our processes already fair and robust? Hasn't there already been a lot of work done around equal opportunities? And with schemes like Disability Confident, are we not already giving disabled people a fair chance and perhaps even more favourable odds? Well, if that is the case, why isn't it working? And it clearly isn't working. Arts Council England statistics show that only 4% of those working in museums are disabled, despite forming 19% of the working age population. But this isn't just about statistics, even though underrepresentation purely in terms of numbers is shocking. That's only part of the story. It's about why we need and want disabled people in our workforce that is important. This is when we move from equality to equity, where we value what disabled people have to offer the sector. When we approach recruitment with an equity perspective, rather than just one of equality, we are able to recognise the nuances. We also start to understand that we not only need to create circumstances for people to be able to survive in the workplace, but that we should be what we should be doing is creating an ecology where people can thrive. This will not only benefit them and their professional development, but it will benefit our organisations too. We believe underrepresentation isn't just a problem for disabled people themselves, but for the museum and heritage sector as a whole. This hinders it from telling authentic disability history stories with insights from the inside. It also makes it more difficult for museums, even if committed to access, to properly understand practical barriers for its visitors. This is why we need to tackle the recruitment problem, as this will mean it will be possible for us to create a more diverse workforce. This is essential for museums to remain responsive, innovative, and relevant for themselves and their communities.
Okay, so it was really lovely to sort of be able to involve Esther, even though not in person today. But that really frames the context of Creating for Change and our approach to equitable recruitment. So I'd like to share with you now a few items from our toolkit from the We Are Not All the Same document. And so let's start from the very beginning of that recruitment process. So we looked critically at role descriptions. And what we decided to do differently was to create person specifications which acknowledge non-traditional ways into the sector. We were really mindful that some deaf, disabled and neurodivergent individuals applying for these roles may have those non-linear career pathways, and we wanted to be able to recognise that and value that. We didn't include any physical requirements for the role. We were very upfront about the flexible working options that would be available to them. And we offered a range of accessible formats for the role descriptions. And on my slide, I have an image which depicts one of the accessible formats that we represented our role description in, which is an easy read document. So there's a big title on the front page which says, "Be a curatorial fellow, we want to hear from you," and a number of images which represent the sort of experience, skills and knowledge that we would be looking for. So those are available sort of through our website. So for the application process, we recognise that often individuals require lots of practical information up front. For this, we felt it was useful to produce introductory films to the organisations. And this really had the benefit of visually illustrating the type of organisation that they would be working within, meet some of the people that would be on their interview panels and that they would be working alongside. So we felt that that was really important, and these were captioned and BSL interpreted. And the image to the right shows the introductory film from Bristol with Jackie, who was one of the champions for Creating for Change at Bristol, standing in front of 5 images within one of their galleries. We also looked at advertising beyond the usual museum networks and sort of thinking about other ways in which disabled people might find out about these roles. I'm just going to go back because I'd love to hear from Claudia now, if you're happy to come off mute. So Claudia, how was an introductory film really useful to you when you were applying for your fellowship role at Black Country Living Museum?
Yes, so I found the videos really sort of helpful, and it's not something that I've seen before with applications and advertising for a job. So I found it really sort of useful to look at them and just sort of get a sort of feel of whether I would, fit into that team, into that museum, and to get a better understanding of sort of the museum and the sort of work that they do. I also found that, I need captions on video, so I'm really pleased to see that that was available. But also, having visual descriptions and BSL interpreters, that is something that you don't normally see. To have all those sort of access needs and access requirements already in place for a wide range of people, I thought this is definitely an organisation that I want to work for, because there it sort of shows me that they're already thinking about being inclusive, being accessible, right at the very beginning. So I was, that's sort of why I was like, yes, this is the organisation for me. I want to work with these people who I feel are going to make sure I access everything that I need to in my role.
Great, thank you, Claudia. So that we didn't just stop there with sort of attracting individuals to apply for these roles. We also thought critically about our application formats. And we offered a range of options to applicants. So they could submit a traditional written application, a CV and covering letter style application. They could submit a film. And I've put on our slide a still taken from a film by Carl Mercer, who was one of our trainees, and he was applying for a role at Colchester and Ipswich museums. He produced a short 7-minute film in application and just blew everybody away. I think it's a shame that we haven't invited Carl to speak today, but his reflections on creating that film was he still used the person specification structure and the specific questions that we asked them to address in their application, and that formed the structure of his film. So I think when we came to the sifting stage, we definitely had a greater connection to those who had created the filmed content, because they were sort of more able to express themselves, and you know, it's a very personable role, and so we could get that message through across immediately. So there was also the option to submit audio recordings and a visual collage. When we were preparing for this presentation today, Claudia said, "Oh, how would it work with a visual collage?" And I drew on the experience of Iris Serendi, who is our fellow at Liverpool. She said that she was applying for these roles just after she'd completed one of her big university projects. And she said that she didn't use a visual collage, but she really appreciated having that option, because she could have been reaching absolute burnout in terms of writing, and visual collage would have been something that she probably would have been able to put together in application. And we're so glad that she did apply, because she has gone on to be successful in a fellowship role for us. We also felt that it was important to provide feedback on application. So often it's pretty disheartening for people joining the sector if they don't receive any feedback on their application, or they get a generic reply saying they haven't been successful and no reason why. So we did carve out time within the project to provide feedback on application if they weren't called for interview. Now, you're all joining us today from different partner museums, and I'm sure lots of you have responsibility for recruitment and the sifting process. So I thought it was really important to add some quotes in here from our partners and how they found the process. So Zena McGreevy at Pitt Rivers Museum commented, "I didn't know what a difference it would make. I found the recruitment process much easier. I could instantly extract the information quicker." And that was in relation to the filmed content in the application. So Kate Parry, head of partnership at Cumbria Museums Consortium, commented on how she created the introductory films. "I remember thinking, I can't do this. How am I going to get everyone together to do a video? And then it occurred to me that I could just get everyone on Zoom and record it and send it. It took us about 20 minutes. My message would be not to overcomplicate things like that these days. It's quite easy to do." So moving on with the process, when we got to interview, we used a few different approaches again. There was an option for remote interview or in person. That was completely down to the applicant's choice. We sent questions 1 week in advance, and those were questions in the order that we would ask them, so there'd be no surprises on the day. We asked every applicant about their access requirements and also provided examples of what access requirements we could meet, so they had those as a basis for their requests. We paid travel expenses. I think I saw statistic the other day that disabled people have around over £500 a month on top of the of expenses on top, just because of the specific requirements. So we didn't want any of our applicants to get out of pocket for their application. We provided feedback on interview. And we also offered disability equality training to the interview panel members. And this was really important because lots of the people who were interviewing presented with difference, presented in ways which, people may, I don't know, create some value judgments on. And, we wanted everyone on the panels to really understand their positioning and question their ableism, so that they could, see beyond the ways in which those individuals were presenting themselves and really get to the crux of what they were talking about. And it was important for us to have a person with lived experience on the panel. Claudia, I'd love to draw on your input here again. This is the thing that we found quite controversial when we've talked about this with other professionals in the museum sector. Questions in advance. So I'd love to hear a bit from Claudia here about what her experience was of having questions in advance at interview.
Yeah, I think it's definitely an access requirement, not necessarily for me, but certainly for other disabled people. But I do think it's just really useful having the questions, because you feel a bit more prepared. Like you might, you will have all the skills on the job application, but it's always sort of how you get that across in an interview. So I think being able to go away and sort of plan almost a script was really helpful, because I could get all those points across that I might not be able to articulate in an interview very well, because being deaf, I do find sometimes it takes a while for me to sort of process what someone's saying. And I do think just general nerves as well in an interview. And I did have 3 interviews a part of the Curation for Change. So I had 3 interviews at different host museums. And even though the questions were the same, my answer just naturally altered as I sort of took bits out. I think that it's just kind of the nature of sort of talking about things. You do just deviate from a script. You're never going to be rigid. And I think the fact that I could relax a little bit more, having known the question in advance, I could sort of take in more of my surroundings, getting to know the individual team members, like the interview panel, and I still feel like that they could, get a sense of who I am as a person, because I was more relaxed. I wasn't just, really nervous and then just thinking about the interview. I was then able to have a bit of a chat afterwards, a bit of a chat beforehand, whereas I think, that kind of give them an idea of what I'm like, which I think is crucial for any sort of person interviewing for a job. It's sort of, it's about the person as well as their skill set. But I think it just gave me that opportunity to really get across my skills that I do have in a good way, but also just to relax and enjoy the interview, enjoy getting to know these people.
Thanks, Claudia. And I've got an image on the screen here, which is images from visual minutes that were taken at our consultation phase of Curating for Change. And there's so it's a mixture of images and words in a kind of illustration format. And I'd just like to pick up one thing, which sort of evidences our kind of need for disability equality training for our interview panel. I'm autistic. Sometimes my behaviour is unusual. I don't have the same qualifications, age and nationality. So they identify that they've kind of come from a Portuguese background. So this is an example of some of the consultation we did to make those changes before the programme started. So what were the results? Lovely quote here: "I've never felt more comfortable or understood during the interview process." So that was from one of the applicants. At the very beginning, one of the risk factors of the project was we just wouldn't get people were applying for roles, and that just was not the case. We had 54 applications for the first 4 fellowships. We had 79 for the traineeships, over 8 roles, and we had 35 applications for the final 4 fellowships. But there were challenges, and it was so difficult to turn people down. Giving feedback was time consuming, but we felt that it was really important. So we carved time to ensure we gave feedback on application and at interview. It was a challenge accepting difference in presentation styles, but I think it was very clear, very obvious who were the better candidates, no matter how they apply for roles. We needed to overcome the barriers of HR processes at our partner museums, partner organisations, and the quickest way to do that was for Curating for Change. So we're hosted by an organisation called Screen South. The quickest way for us to do that was for Screen South and Curating for Change to take responsibility for the recruitment procedure and not go through the partner organisations. So another quote here: "The first application that I found to be truly accessible, demonstrating what good practice looks like." But that is not where it ends, because when you have your deaf, disabled or neurodivergent colleague in role, there may be some workplace adjustments, some requirements for them to thrive in their museum careers. So what we started off with in the induction process were access riders. Now, the term access rider, we had that question at our sector forum last week: where did that come from? And this was a concept that we took from Michelle Taylor, who has done a lot of training with the theatre sector. And the concept of a rider, you know, like a musician has a rider with various requirements on, like blue Smarties in their dressing room and things. so that's where the terminology has sort of come from. These are sort of requirements for an individual to be able to participate in role, thrive in roles. So we completed this part of the onboarding process, and that was a virtual meeting with the employee, line manager, myself, Curating for Change project manager, and the head of Accentuate. And it enabled to identify any workplace adjustments that needed to be made. It's really important, actually, that this isn't a one-off meeting and that you use and review the access rider regularly, because no one's working environment stays the same. No individual's access requirements stay the same. So we recommend, along with Michelle Taylor, to include this as part of your regular catch-ups. Let's just have a look at your access rider and review it. Or if something comes up in a catch-up, is that something we should add to the access rider? So here is an example of an access rider. So we had 4 different columns. The first column, we asked questions regarding sort of laptop and software. So this table on the screen is for a fictional fellow. So this fictional fellow requires a laptop to be provided by the host museum, and we are going to put through an access to work claim for some software and equipment. So that's Dragon software, text help, and a headset. Within their office, their furniture and working space, they require a quiet working space for using their text help computer software. They require an ergonomic chair with a headrest. It should be naturally lit, and they do require regular breaks. The third column talks about working arrangements, accommodation and travel. So this fictional fellow works in a hybrid way, 2 days at a museum, 3 days at home, and they will require an on-site staff pass and parking required for access. Now, the fourth column deals with communication. So I'd like to hand over to Claudia, who's said that she's really happy to share what was on her access rider regarding communication.
Yes, so actually when Emily asked me this question, because, you know, what access requirements do I have? When we were preparing for this presentation, and I was like, I don't have any access requirements. But I mean, that's not true. I do have access requirements. I think they're such a part of my day-to-day life that I don't think of them as access requirements, especially because my requirements are so easy to implement, really. So my access requirement would be that I can't call on the phone, so I just have to text people. I sort of need someone to take notes for me in meetings, and you know, when we have group discussion, just to sort of try and talk one at a time. Otherwise I can get a bit lost as who's talking, what people saying, and that kind of thing. And I think as well, my museum, who are online today, listening to me, I have to say they have been so fantastic in making me feel included, and all these adjustments, I don't think about them. The team don't sort of think, oh well, you know, I've forgotten to take notes today. It's just implemented into our day-to-day life at the museum. So I do feel like I don't have any requirements because I'm so included. And so I think that's how it should be. They shouldn't be seen as an additional thing that, you know, should be put in place and then, you know, someone might forget. It should just be there already. And I think the museum that I work with, yeah, they've changed the way they work. And I think even sort of once I've moved on into my next job, they'll continue to be accessible.
Thanks, Claudia. So Claudia's examples are just really small adjustments. They didn't cost anything. And I won't have time to show this video now, but this is from the National Autistic Society, and there's a link there and I'll put it in the chat when I finish speaking. But this is a series of interviews with individuals who identify as being autistic, and they share some of the workplace adjustments that have been made within their own sort of access riders. So it just gives some really, really good examples of little things that you can do to make the workplace a more welcoming place. If there are larger adjustments that are going to cost some money, you could consider making an access to work claim. So some adjustments that Access to Work have funded for the programme are computer software, training for staff working directly with an employee, actually creating brand new roles like an administrative support worker we have for one of our fellows. There are contributions towards accommodation and accessible travel provision, for example, taxis. But Access to Work really prefers to liaise with the individuals directly. So what you can do as employer is you can set a start date, get your colleague to sign a contract, and then start that process of getting in contact with Access to Work. Because we've found if we make the Access to Work claim after that individual has started enroll, they essentially go to the bottom of the pile. And so it's taken about 6 months for us to get a caseworker allocated and have some of those workplace adjustments signed off. So that would be our recommendation. We even completed Access to Work claims for our 40-day traineeships, because what you can do is that individual can take that Access to Work claim onto new roles beyond the project. So I'm very aware we're coming to the end of our time now, so we won't have any time to do this, but I just really want to encourage you all to take 1 or 2 items from the toolkit today that you're going to take back to work, and find someone within your organisation to share those with. Just if it's over a photocopier or in the kitchen over a cup of tea, tell somebody about them. It will help you remember those. And then I'd also like you to go to your diaries, put 30 minutes time in, and have that time allocated to read over the We Are Not the Same action plan and this presentation. We'll share it with you after the event, and try and have that with somebody else in your organisation so that you can share your thoughts and ideas with somebody else. It's good to talk it through and say things out loud. So That just leaves me to say, please keep in touch with us and what we're doing. The programme runs until April 24, and we've got a really exciting year ahead of us because lots of our first cohort of fellows are finishing up their placements, and they're going to be doing exhibitions across the country that you'll be get to see, where they've worked in a co-produced way with disabled people from their local communities to put on exhibitions and outputs at their various organisations. You can visit our website for more information about that. You can email me, cfc@accentuateuk.org, and of course follow us on Twitter. I'd really encourage you all to come to our next sector forum, which is all about career development and how we can ensure our colleagues thrive in their museum careers. So we're looking at organisational networks and also mentoring opportunities. So that's Wednesday the 14th of June, and it's just an hour and a half, so we're hoping that's going to be really easy for you to fit into your day. But I'll put some of those links in the chat now, and I'll stop sharing my screen.
That's absolutely wonderful. Thank you so much, Emily and Claudia, for a really, I think, in the time given, a really great overview of the project, but also practically for you, Claudia, how it's actually worked. It's really good. Just seeing the chat was just buzzing, and isn't it? It's wonderful that this has come about because of Curating for Change, but a lot of comments saying, but why shouldn't we just be doing this anyway? Wouldn't it make the process much easier for all interviewees and interviewers actually as well to be prepared for that? So hoping, I think by looking at the chat, that a lot of people have you sparked a lot of light bulbs for people here today. We were going to take questions from the group. Rebecca, is there anything that's burning that's popped up in a particular question that you could push forward to us, please? You're on mute still. Thank you.
So sorry. I can't see when I've got my screen half on. There's a few things, and there's more coming in, so sorry if I'm missing any, and maybe Emily and Claudia, if you are able to answer any on the chat afterwards, that'd be great. But really interesting one that was asked quite early on was about embedding these inclusive recruitment practices and ensuring they're not just linked to one person, so that when that person leaves, they don't just disappear. And if there's any tips on how to make these permanent features.
So a little bit was taken into account in terms of the structure of the programme. So each organisation has a line manager for the individual fellow or trainee, and then also a champion, which is somebody from the senior leadership within that organisation. And it is hoped that that champion role really infiltrates and makes that clear amongst the senior leadership. But what we have found that's been really useful is our sector forums, which are those touch points for the discussions and the sharing of the lessons learned from the programme. We've been encouraging, it's been very focused on maybe HR teams. And so within our partner museums, they've been sharing those internally, and people have been coming along. And it's been useful for us to have our sector forum filmed and available online, and then also have our toolkit written down, so that can be shared internally within the organisation. But I think Esther and I, as a contact point, are really going to try our hardest to look for funding and stay around for as long as we possibly can, so we can remain that sort of knowledge bank for people to approach us.
That kind of links to a couple of questions actually around if you're able to share what your plans are beyond 2024. That might not be possible.
Yeah. So there is nothing in place at the moment. We are based at Screen South, which is a kind of, we kind of survive on project to project funding. So we are looking for new funding opportunities. And one of the big feedback that we get is you're very England based, and that has just simply been down to our funders. So we are looking beyond that, but we are taking on some fantastic partnerships with other programs that are running. So there's Sensational Museums, which is a Arts and Humanities Research Council funded project. And so they are just kicking off, and they're looking at a kind of inclusive design within museum exhibitions and exhibits, and that's more national. So we're hoping to sort of partner a bit more with them. So yeah, nothing in place at the moment, but definitely hoping that we can find something.
Definitely. Sorry, there's a few questions. I don't know if I fully understand the question, but that's just my lack of knowledge. But whether you've had any limitations to eligibility to access to work due to being public sector, I don't know if you can speak to that at all.
No. We are the employee, the employer. So what has happened? So say if we have put in, or the individual has put in a large claim for something like automatic door openers at an organisation, which could be, you know, up to about £10,000 to get that installed, and that would be an access requirement that would be covered by Access to Work. If it's a large spend and you are a large organisation, Access to Work will ask that you make a contribution of a percentage to those works, because that is something that is not just going to benefit that individual within that workplace, but it will benefit lots and lots of other people and make your venue more accessible. So they rightly feel that you need to make a contribution towards those costs. But we have had that experience, and they've said, just name your price, basically name what you will contribute. So that has been really nice. So we've been able to kind of work with the organisation and also talk to our funder to see what would be in a reasonable percentage to put forward for that. So sometimes it does depend on the size of your organisation, how much they expect you to match funds. But mostly they will kind of shoulder the majority of the cost.
Oh, great. And have you got time for one more quick one, Sam? Like my clock's wrong.
I think so. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
It's
a question about whether the recruitment process could be adapted for volunteer recruitment. I know that's something we looked at the event last year, and the importance of including volunteers as part of that workforce.
Brilliant.
I don't know.
Yeah, great question. My background is in volunteer management, so I feel well placed to answer that. One of our trainee museums their feedback to us has been, we've been really enjoyed being part of the process, but sadly, due to what we all are aware of the museum sector, like roles don't come up that often, and we don't want to lose our momentum. We don't want to sort of mothball this until we are going to create a new role and then try and implement these practices. So their suggestion was, which I really like, is that actually they start integrating that into their volunteer recruitment procedures. So maybe it's a little bit more flexible, maybe they're able to sort of bypass some of those HR arrangements and then sort of gather that data internally to really prove that it makes it a more inclusive, more equitable experience. As standard, I'd say if you're meeting with volunteers, it is not an interview setup. It is a catch up. It is a nice to meet you. It's a one-to-one, and you should be giving those volunteers all that information beforehand anyway. So that it is a way to sort of be a bit more flex and try out some of those approaches and gather that data to say, look, this really, really works. But one word of caution is that we are talking about getting people who are deaf, disabled or neurodivergent into paid roles within the museum sector. So I would say that, yeah, great, use it. It probably should be in place anyway for a volunteering role, but it cannot stop there. It has to go into your formal recruitment practice. And as I said, I think the most controversial thing that everyone has an opinion on is questions in advance at interview. Something really, really easy that you can put in place that makes it a more equitable experience for everyone. If you want to see a little bit of a discussion about that, on our website, I've put the link in the chat. On our resources page, we've got some of our sector forum filmed clips, and there's a great panel discussion with some sector leaders, and Matthew Cock from Vocalise specifically talks about his experience of using questions in advance interview and how it's not a magic cape that it doesn't pull the wool over someone's eyes and that you can't it's not a magic item that makes somebody appear incredible. You can still really see who is a better candidate, even by sending questions in advance. So I encourage you to look at that.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much. I would say I'm sure most people on the call have actually interviewed people before. Also, it must make your job easier as well, actually. It's a level playing field then as well, isn't it? Thank you so much again, Emily, and thank you so much, Claudia, as well, for sharing your personal lived experience. I think that's hugely valuable to hear that. We're going to have, if that's okay, Rebecca, have a short 10-minute break now, just as a screen break. Go and look at some natural daylight if you can. Come back at, that will be 6 minutes past 3 precisely. We'll see you then. Hi there, everyone. We couldn't remember whether or not it was 6 minutes past, but we're going for 6 minutes past. So here we are, the homeward stretch. It's been really informative so far, hasn't it? And I understand, I get this, that every year we do this, there is a lot to digest. So totally understandable if minds are feeling a little full now. But I think a really lovely way to complete today is to be hearing from another couple of speakers on our last panel discussion, and we'll be exploring stories of disability. So I would like to welcome you to our two panelists. The first one is Sarah Plum, Research Centre for Museums and Galleries at the University of Leicester. Hello, Sarah. And she's worked on the Everywhere and Nowhere project, exploring histories of disability across the National Trust. I can't wait to hear more about this one. And also Angela Steins, an ethics and inclusion consultant for cultural institutions and founder of the Lyme Museum. Sarah, if I can ask you first, please, and then I will come to you, Angela. Sarah, if you can briefly tell us about the Everywhere and Nowhere project, because it's really fascinating. And Rebecca, if it's possible to spotlight us, if that's easier for people to focus on, it's fine if it isn't. Thank you.
Oh, were you not spotlighted? I thought you were, sorry. And everyone else? I think you are.
Apologies, maybe it was just my view. Thank you.
If it's all right, I'd like to just share a few slides. I haven't got many, and I'll try and keep it as brief as possible, but I thought it might be helpful just to illuminate and give a bit more context behind the Everywhere and Nowhere project, if that's all right.
Yes, please, that's fascinating. Yeah, it's a brilliant project. Yeah, thank you.
I'm not that familiar with Zoom, so fingers crossed it works okay. Just shout if I'm not doing anything correctly. Okay. I think that should be sharing now.
Yes, it is, yeah.
Fantastic. No. Brilliant. Okay, so just to also briefly introduce myself. So my name's Sarah Plum. I'm a senior research associate at the Research Centre for Museums and Galleries, or RCMG, and we're based at the University of Leicester. I'm a white cis woman in her early 40s, and I've got shoulder length blonde hair, and I'm wearing a black and white striped top today. I'm in a room at home, and I've got a wooden door behind me that's opened, and some artworks behind me on the wall in the distance. So as I said, just really wanted to, I'll try to keep it brief as possible, but I wanted to just introduce a little bit about one of our most recent projects, which is a collaboration with the National Trust, which is called Everywhere and Nowhere, and it's about exploring disability histories across the National Trust. On the screen, on the slide at the moment, there are three words saying everywhere and nowhere, and the words and nowhere are redacted out. And I'll share in a little bit a short extract from a film, which will sort of illuminate a bit more about the use of redaction in this particular project. So before I get to Everywhere and Nowhere, I just wanted to give a little bit of background about the Research Centre. I'm sure many of you in the room know about RCMG, particularly my colleagues Richard Sandell, Suzanne MacLeod and Jocelyn Dodd, who retired only a couple of years ago, have been working over the last 20 years with cultural partners to develop new and participatory approaches to exploring disability histories and the ways in which museums, galleries and heritage sites represent disabled lives in their institutions. And we always aim to centre disabled researchers, artists and equality campaigners and communities with lived experience of disability at the centre, at the heart of our projects. I loved Shani's introduction this morning, and it was so great to hear about the social model of disability. And for us, this is a key theoretical concept and an approach that underpins all of our work. We also take an ethically informed and rights-based approach to understanding physical and mental differences. And we support cultural institutions in how disability is represented and how they can really play a role in changing conversations in society around disability. We've also, and this for me is really exciting, we've worked beyond cultural institutions too. So my colleagues have worked with medics on training programs, and also worked with within medical schools within our own institution, the University of Leicester. Just to describe what's on the slide here, there's 4 pictures. On the left, we've got performer Matt Fraser, who worked on a project with us called Cabinets of Curiosity. And in this image, he's standing against a white tiled wall and is holding up 2 prosthetic arms. Some of you that attended a Museum Association conference a few years ago might recognise Matt and this particular image that forms part of a project he worked on with us. The image at the top in the centre is of Deaf Men Dancing, and it shows 3 men on stage performing holding balloons and feathers. And these are just 2 of the groups of disability experts that we've worked with over the years. The image at the bottom in the centre and on the right show photographs of the new Welcome Collection permanent display, and that's Being Human. We worked with them back in 2018 and 19 to support them in developing a more inclusive display that looked through a social lens. And the photographs, the images you can see here at the bottom, show a woman of colour using an electric wheelchair visiting one of the displays. And on the right hand side is another image of an artwork by Yinka Shonibari called Refugee Astronaut. And it's a mannequin of an astronaut dressed in Nigerian textiles. So just to come on now to the project Everywhere and Nowhere, we've been working with the National Trust for several years now, but since 2019 we've been working specifically to support them in a larger programme of work called Everyone Welcome, which is about supporting them in their inclusive and equitable transformation. So this particular strand of work, Everywhere and Nowhere, we worked with the Trust to reveal for the first time the rich and multiple connections that the Trust's historic properties, their sites, their landscapes, and their collections had with previously untold and unexplored histories of disability. The work really started back in 2021, and it initially started quite small scale, but I'm sure as most of you can appreciate here and have experienced yourself, it grew into something much bigger, and we were able to generate more funding to support that. The main sort of aspirations and questions that the project came to ask here on the slide on the left-hand side are: how can we identify histories of disability across National Trust sites and present them in ethically informed ways that enrich everyone's understanding of both our sites' histories and their contemporary resonance? And then the second question is: how can we carry out this work ethically and inclusively, placing expertise derived from lived experience of disability at the heart of this process? How can we share disability stories in ways that reflect leading edge accessibility practice? So over this 18-month period, we worked with the Trust to developed an open call out to kind of uncover and unearth objects and stories and sites that had connections. And we received over 80 object sites and stories in actually quite a short amount of time, which really suggested to us that there's many more out there and there's much more work to do. So we work with over 50 National Trust staff and volunteers and 30 external curators. What I thought was really fascinating in one of the earlier panel discussions was about the focus on placing experience and expertise around disability at the heart of this process. So bringing together a steering group of experts, and we did a similar approach. So we worked with colleagues in the Trust, including Access and Equality Specialist Heather Smith and other leading curators. But we also brought together and worked with 2 incredible project coordinators who I'm pretty sure are here today actually, so hi. So it's Dr. Jenny Hunt and Isabel Lawrence, and they did exceptional work. But we also brought together an international and intersectional steering group of 6 disability experts who both had lived and professional experience. So the group included historians, researchers, artists, campaigners and activists. And a couple of these included artists Chris Samuel and Tony Heaton, as well as Angela, who's here today on the panel. And we developed a series of workshops bringing everyone together to support in shortlisting and exploring some of the ethical opportunities and challenges that we might face in telling these stories. And ultimately, from that list of 80 object stories and sites we received, with the steering group, we shortlisted down to a final list of 10, which you can see pictured here. I'm not going to visually describe them because I'm conscious of time, but what I will say is we do have a full film of which features all of these 10 objects, which is audio described, and I know Rebecca will be sharing the link in the chat at some point of the audio described version. So the two outputs from the project were this incredible film, and I'll share a short clip of that next, but also a framework and a set of guidance to support cultural practitioners, specifically in reinterpreting histories of disability in an inclusive and ethically informed way. So on this next slide here, I'm just highlighting the framework that we developed, which sits at the heart of a set of ethical guidance that I mentioned here. So on the screen, we've got a model which has 10 intersecting shapes of diamonds and hexagons. And within each shape is a different ethical coordinate or a piece of ethical guidance. I know we're going to, as part of the panel discussion, speak more to the ethics of this type of work. So I won't go into this now, but I will pick up on this more, and we'll be able to share the link to the guidance if you're interested. But finally, just to wrap up, I wanted to share a short film, a short extract of the Everyone Know a film. It's just 1.5 minutes long. And on this slide here, it's a still of the film. And we've got artist Christopher Samuel, who was one of our main collaborators on the project. And he's looking out at screen. He's a black man wearing thick black rimmed glasses. And on the right of him is a British Sign Language interpreter. I wanted to share just this short clip really to show the inclusive approach that we took and the fact that we wanted to model this in every aspect of the project. So we thought really deeply about how we could embed access. So it wasn't just an add-on, it wasn't just something that was seen as a kind of bolt-on, it was fully integrated within the film. So what I'll do now is I'll share the film. As I said, it's only 1.5 minutes, it's just an extract. And if you do want to access the audio described or the full version, you can do that on our website too. Hopefully this will work. Here we go. Sorry, that's gone funny on my screen. Is it okay on yours?
I can hear it. I think it's moving on.
We all recognise Henry VIII, and the Trust holds multiple portraits, including this one at Charcoal Park in Warwickshire. But how many of us know that he sustained 2 injuries in 1536, which resulted in his use of a series of mobility aids? As he got older, he used a walking stick, a wheelchair, and a pulley mechanism installed at Whitehall Palace to lift him up and down the stairs. Henry VIII crafted his image carefully, hiding his impairments to present a highly constructed image of power and kingship. But what does that say about the relationship between disability and power throughout history? Whose interests are we protecting when we shy away from discussing disability today?
I'm sorry, I think that might have come up a bit funny on your screen, but if it did, please do take a look at the full film later on.
That's wonderful. Thanks so much, Sarah, for showing that. And yes, all the links will be shared in the slides today. It's wonderful to hear about that. And now, Angela, we'd like to come to you, please, if you could tell us a bit more about your incredible work as well. I'd love to hear that.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me well? Okay,
yes.
Great. So just for an introduction, my name is Angela. I'm a white cis woman. I'm disabled. I'm blonde with hair sort of shoulder length, and I've got a black jacket, and I'm in front of a white background. So I'm here today as the founder of the Lime Museum, but also as a person with lived experience. But I wanted to tell you a little bit about the project that I've been running for exactly 3 years now. So the Lime Museum was born from a single moment, and equally from 2 decades of life. It was born in a single moment when I was walking in the medicine galleries of the Science Museum in London before they opened to the public, and I was facing an object asking myself, where does my invisible illness and disability fit in the largest medical collection on display? But it also comes from 2 decades experiencing the world as a chronically ill person, but also 2 decades experiencing the world as a museum person, a visitor first, and a researcher and curator second. Now, the Lime Museum is the first museum to explore the lived experience of so-called invisible illnesses and disabilities, but we're not really here to be the first at anything. We'd actually really like to be quite irrelevant. We'd really like if representation and inclusion were so embedded in museum culture, practice, recruitment, representation, and materiality that would be quite redundant, but we're not there yet. So instead, we exist as a virtual museum with touring exhibitions and a growing educational hub. We're registered as a small museum with the UK Association of Independent Museums, and we're hosted in Leicester, so not far from Sarah and the University of Leicester. What do? We explore the lived experience of invisible illnesses and disabilities through materiality and through visual storytelling. So we explore it through stuff. We're really interested in stuff, and we're especially interested in the daily mundane stuff that linger around us, that seem to follow the disabled and chronically ill wherever we go. It's medicine, pills, hot water bottles, needles, acupressure mats, heart monitors, stuffed animals, books and notebooks, and therapy books. It's materiality. We collect them, but not as physical objects per se, although we did collect some, but as fatlays and as artwork. Our very first in-person exhibition, The Materiality of Invisibility, it was called, took place in Leicester last year. And it was a display of visually striking flatlays of everyday objects shared by individuals around the world who shared their stories through the simple and yet really complex act of putting together objects that represent their lived experience and sharing those with the world. I didn't share pictures today because I think they really deserve taking the time to look into, but they're being added to our website and they're on all our social media on the Lime Museum. With our exhibition, what we did was 3 things. We allowed people to share experiences that are hard to put into words sometimes, and we allowed them to share it through the medium of visual storytelling, and here in this case, flatlay photography. The second thing is we elevated everyday, mundane, sometimes frankly boring or ugly objects to the status of museum objects. And thus we're reframing and rethinking what is worthy to be on display in a museum. And the third thing is by doing so, we're really challenging the representation of the chronically ill and disabled in museums, but we're also challenging the role of the museum in the 21st century in the 21st century, and the role it has in choosing which stories to tell and which objects to display or to collect. But also the role of the museum in sometimes pervasive ableist narratives and exclusion, from recruitment to display. So we have small ambitions, as you can see, and we're only just getting started.
I love that as an introduction. I remember, Angela, when I won the Radical Changemaker Award, almost standing going, but this shouldn't be radical change, should it? Making museum accessible to send kids. Anyway, You're absolutely right. I hear you. We have a list of questions, but because, well, we've got plenty of time, but I think I'm going to do them in reverse order if that's all right. So as Sarah has already mentioned the ethics, I would like to ask the ethics questions first, which I think you guys have been prompted on. So Angela's just still on mute. Maybe you can answer this first. What are the ethical considerations are there when it comes to exploring stories of disability? That's a massive question, isn't it? But
yeah, starting with this is quite should
I could have led up to this. It was the last, but I really want this answered, so then we'll see how much time we got for the others. Is that okay with you guys to answer this one first? Thank you.
Should I get going, or do you want to start?
Yeah, sorry, Angela, are you okay with that, seeing as you're still unmuted?
Yeah, I mean, I had thought about this one in the other order, so now I feel like I'm starting with the full on. But I think for me, the biggest ethical consideration, and I suppose if we don't talk about sort of how to work with lived experience and things, we'll get back to this. For me, the biggest challenge in terms of the ethics is making sure that as an institution, we do this not in a tokenistic way. And I think that that is still the biggest ethical issue to me. And as someone who's worked as an ethical researcher in other domains, including human remains, repatriations, and so on, it actually belongs to all these sort of different areas. And it's still the biggest challenge is how do we do it in a way that we actually care and do it in an ethical way and not just because it looks good. And it sounds simplistic, and yet so many institutions, not just museums, do it. And we see this, I think, the most to me when it's International Day of Disabled People, where everyone suddenly sort of comes out and says we're doing great things, and yet people user experience during the year is lacking at best, and sometimes really, really just discriminatory.
Right, yes, I totally agree with you. I have a similar feeling towards children in need, and then when that day is not here, suddenly we're forgotten. Sarah, I'd love to hear your answer on this as well, please. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely spot on, and something I was thinking about is it's incredibly important to be for Disability History Month and to sort of promote that work, but it shouldn't just be that month, should it? It should be throughout the year. But in terms of perhaps highlighting some of the ethical considerations that we've specifically developed as a result of the Everywhere and Nowhere project, and this stems from the learning from the steering group, which also included Angela, as well as our other disability experts. I think one thing that really kind of stood out and has come up in other projects as well, and something that Shani raised at the beginning, is actually resisting that medicalized and deficit way of interpreting or presenting disability stories. And one of our kind of ethical coordinates is suggest that we need to really resist that, but also on the flip present much more complex, full and rounded lives. So one of our examples, one of our final stories was a painting produced by artist Sarah Biffin. Some of you might know Sarah Biffin, you might not. She's an incredible artist, but so often when her story and her artwork is presented, it focuses on her impairments. And of course, we wanted to acknowledge that she was a disabled woman, a disabled artist, but we very purposefully chose not to primarily focus on that impairment. And instead, we focused on her achievements and talents as an artist. She happened to be disabled, rather than sort of focusing on a story where she achieved success despite of her impairment. So I think that's a really key one that came out in this project and has come out in previous projects. So when we're thinking about telling these stories, it's really helpful to keep coming back to that social model of disability. We need to sort of understand that social model and learn more about ableism. Also, obviously, we're coming from, my background's more from the research centre. So it's really important that we do our research and that we tell authentic and evidence stories, so that we can act upon those deeply entrenched negative views of disability. We can draw on leading edge disability and accessibility practice and scholarship beyond the cultural sector. And through doing that deep research and trying to find those authentic stories, it's really important that we privilege the lived experience of disabled people in their own words, and we can do that. It can be difficult, and I think that's one of my responses to one of your other questions, Sam, about some of the challenges. It can be difficult to find those experiences in people's own words, but if we're not able to find them in the past, we can work with contemporary disabled people to share those experiences in their own words. So I think that's really critical as well. I think this has come up throughout today, and it feels so critical. And I think Emily touched on this specifically. We need to sort of recognise our own partial lived experience and make sure that we work with disability experts, with people both with professional and lived experience, that can draw on a diversity of ideas and insights to really help shape our approach. I've got loads, but I'm going to stop there because I know there's lots more questions, but do have a look at our framework if you're particularly interested in finding out more about how we can think about those ethical considerations and undertaking this work.
That's great. Thank you, Sarah. And yes, we'll go for the challenges one in a minute. I'm just mindful of the hero to zero approach. We seem to sort of in this country in particular, and I guess I notice, and I see this more in terms of how a child disability is framed, is either up there on a pedestal or it's down there at the bottom. It's pity porn or hero. It's just, it's like, well, where's the C in the middle, the massive actual real lived experience of we're all just being human first and foremost, and we just happen to have, as all of us happen to have, stuff that's descriptive about us. And yeah, I think there's a lot of uncomfortableness around. So actually, yeah. So the biggest challenge, and then there's the other question about the fear factor, which I think is a challenge, isn't it? So, question then: the biggest challenge that museums face with this work. Well, again, this work we're talking about specifically today is specifically about disability inclusion. Which one of you would like to go first? You're both open mic at the moment.
I think for me, the biggest challenge that museums face with disability inclusion and disability representation is the fact that we are museums, and that the museum was built historically as a place of exclusion, and it was built as a place of classification. And so when we start with being museums, I think that's something that we sort of sometimes omit, that we sometimes forget, that museums are sometimes by their very nature exclusive places, and it's especially true for medical collections. And medical museums have been created to show what a healthy body is and what a sort of disabled, deviant, ill body is. And I think that sometimes it's something that we don't really address. And while the past does not necessarily define all museum work today, it certainly has an influence on it. And I think that that's very important, because in many ways, while we change and transform museums, some of these things sometimes remain, and change is quite slow in terms of changing collections and histories, and there's a lot of good effort. But I always think that this is something that we sort of skip, and we're like, today, what's the challenge? But the museum is the heir of what the museum was created for. And I think that's really important, but it's also really important because it means that some of the collections today can be very triggering to people. And I think that that's a very big challenge. And the environment of being, for example, I went to a medical collection quite recently, which was well done and had a really fantastic team, and there was no issue in there that they could have seen, but being in that space was incredibly triggering, and just sort of the way that it looked like a hospital setting and so on. And I think that there's this, because I have this understanding that first the medical world and the medical collection sort of reflects to me my lived experience, but also that historically this is a place where my fate would have been quite bad. And that I would have been classified in a way that I wouldn't have been welcome in a way that I'm welcome to the museum world or to an event like today in this moment.
Yes, we do take on some challenges, don't we, our sector, but I'm glad we do. But you're absolutely right. We are part of, as we are the decolonisation and all the other subjects we look at.
And it's a challenge, not necessarily a problem or a complete, but it's a challenge that sometimes I think we omit. Exactly, yeah.
Sarah, what are your thoughts on this, please?
I thought when I was thinking about this before, I thought actually, Emily and Claudia did such an incredible job earlier, and that was one of the main things I was thinking about, is actually who have we got working in the sector, and that is such a challenge. But it was incredible to hear from Emily and Claudia, and each step of the process and how we can overcome that. I also think in terms of existing staff members, actually some of the challenges is about finding that resource and that time and that space to actually enable existing staff to develop the expertise, to really have the time and resources to, obviously attend days like this, which is incredible, but attend other training too, to be able to research and educate themselves. So it's not just a sort of project by project basis, that it's much more embedded. And something I sort of touched on earlier, and specifically thinking about stories, is sometimes it can be a challenge, obviously, to find the material, or at least a sort of perceived challenge. Sometimes it might be about knowing where to search or what search terms to use. Language might be vague, or historic language used to categorize or catalogue is often very offensive in today's terms. Information about disabled people in the past might be lost or distorted. So sometimes we need to sort of learn to read between the lines as well. And as I mentioned before, it can be difficult to find material in people's own words. But it's really important that we dig deeper. We go beyond institutions and archives, we work with public records, disabled historians as well. And if the material really isn't there, that we bring those contemporary voices in and perspectives. Again, I think this has been touched on, but embedding it institutionally, so it's not just the responsibility of one person or one department, it's not just a short-term project. So how can all staff members and departments adopt an ethical and inclusive way of working? So we've been, on many of our projects, we've also been working really closely with the communications team and the marketing team. And we found that actually, very simply and unintentionally, a lot of the hard work can be undone through using kind of ableist language in social media. And so we've kind of learned this over the years, that it's really important that all departments are looking at this and are understanding ableism. And it might not be intentional, but actually, if you're, for example, you've developed, a really interesting reinterpretation project, worked with the learning and engagement teams, but then the comms department put out a tweet that uses ableist language, that can just undo all of that hard work. So it's ensuring that everyone's on board with this, and everyone sort of understands that social model of a social contextual model of disability and the harm that can be done through using ableist language. I just wanted to again sort of say a big hi to Jenny and Isabel, who were our project coordinators. They worked really hard with National Trust curators to develop a sort of set of guidance in terms of how you can search and uncover some of these hidden or sort of erased histories of disability. So I'm sure we can share some of that later if that's helpful, if anyone specifically wants to do a bit more work in terms of kind of archival searching too.
Thank you. I'm just minded as well. I'm going to ask the next question will be, how can museums overcome their fear of getting it wrong? Which I think the fear factor, I strongly believe that fear factor is an element in most prejudices, but I guess that's another training for another day. And the backlash as well, particularly on social media. And I was just mindful, obviously, the Everywhere and Nowhere got wonderful backlash, didn't it? From the, is it Daily Mail or one of the others, about how dare you disabled Henry VIII. But also I'm just mindful as well of the recent one. I don't know if you all saw, shared on Twitter or not, the photograph that Boots the chemist did of their new accessible parking, and they called it less able parking, which actually I have to say I laughed at, because if somebody's really bad at parking, that's how you would label that, less able parking. Let's give you a really wide base. Unfortunately, obviously they had the universal disability sign with the person in the wheelchair, and they took to that and then they were lambasted quite rightly on social media for getting that wrong. How on earth they got that wrong? An organization that big with that many people. But maybe this was a beautiful way, or a horrible way, of showing how an organization even that big, with all those many people working for it, somebody in their marketing department or their sign writing department didn't understand. So yeah, another clear example of through organizational understanding. So yeah, just to reiterate then that last, maybe the last question about getting it wrong. So how can you overcome this fear of getting it wrong? And that could be anything, couldn't it? From front of house staff, what language they use, how do they deal with a situation? For instance, if a child or young person is having a meltdown, or if somebody can't get into the building and they feel maybe embarrassed because they're in a really old building and it's just not physically accessible, all the way up to recruitment, as we've talked about today. Who'd like to go first? Angela, the backlashes of your work and how it's responded to, and so how to overcome fear of starting this, please. Angela, you happy to?
Oh, should I? Yeah, I think that I don't think there is a universal answer on how to get it right, and I think that maybe that's something that we need to realize, is that actually there's just not one solution. I think that maybe looking at it the other way, if we do nothing, we definitely get it wrong. But also, if we do not improve our recruitment, if we do not have more expensive narratives, if we don't have more representation, we definitely do it wrong, but we also cause harm, because not being represented in a museum is the same as, is an extension of not being represented in society. So while there is many ways that museums can do it wrong, and there are examples and things, and it's scary to be out in the open, when you do nothing, you definitely create harm, because you basically say you don't belong here, you don't exist in history, which the National Trust Everywhere Nowhere project prove is not the case. But when you erase people because you're too scared, then you create harm. So I think that's just, trying is always better, and there are many tools, and we've seen today there are so many great websites, like yours actually, and Everywhere Nowhere, like your two example of resources. There are so many resources on how to get it right, that doing nothing is the doing wrong, and it actually is not. Let's just not do something so we don't get it wrong, because not doing it is harmful, and it projects an image that you're not worthy of being, that you do not exist in history, which as an identity is incredibly harmful, but also that you're not worthy of putting the effort. And I think, like Sarah can tell a bit more about this, but to do it right and to get over this fear of doing it wrong, it's working with people with lived experience, and it's just the key to shifting that. But I'll let Sarah talk about that.
Thank you. That's great. As a brilliant, there's a lot of t-shirt slogans coming out from today, but so we do nothing, we definitely do it wrong. Surely it's on one. Sarah, I mean, I alluded to the backlash, and the National Trust, thankfully, do incredible forward-thinking work. They clearly are armed now with really good PR, aren't they? So that they're ready for the backlash before it happens. I was still shocked that it happened with this one, though. How contentious can being accessible to disabled history be? Wow. But yeah, that's the climate we're working in, folks. So Sarah, would you like to talk to that?
Absolutely. Maybe? Yeah, I can talk a bit about the sort of some of the backlash in the media, and I'm sort of pleased that I mentioned about how important it is that we worked with the press as well as the comms and marketing team, and they were fantastic. Actually, they were really well equipped, and I'm sure they won't mind me sharing that. They've come on a journey. We worked with the National Trust back in 2017 on an LGBTQ project called Prejudice and Pride, and it was sort of they were less confident then than they are now. But what really played out, which was really interesting for us to see, is that the National Trust, took a kind of firm position. They didn't budge, they didn't backtrack, they didn't apologise, but through social media and through the comments on the Daily Mail online site, what we found was actually the amount of people that actually came to our defence was incredible. And we actually really didn't need to say very much, because all of them, many of the National Trust members, many of the audiences, many of even the people reading the Daily Mail were saying, well, I don't understand what the issue is here. So that was a journey with the comms and marketing team and the press team, but they did need support on that. But as I said, it was, for us actually, it couldn't have actually played out better, because we didn't really need to say very much. Of course, that might not always be the case, but I think you need to be really clear beforehand. So sorry, my brain is skipping around a bit here, but we actually came up with a strategy beforehand. So although I was quite shocked that there was a backlash, we have been there before when we've worked with the trust on other areas of work. So we actually developed with the trust a kind of Q&A, so a way that we could respond, so that we were singing from the same hymn sheet, that we knew what we wanted to say, that we were clear and we didn't sort of budge from that. So that was actually really helpful. So I guess sort of preempting the potential of backlash can be helpful. The other thing that's sort of off on a tangent really here, but something that really came out strongly in the project around fear of getting it wrong was around language and terminology. And I'm sure, I felt this way in the past on other projects I've worked on. That fear of getting it wrong, using the wrong language can stifle you, can hold you up, can create inertia. And actually sometimes language and terminology is different. So if you think about in the US, they might say people with disabilities, whereas in the UK, we would say disabled people, but both are coming from that same position. Both are absolutely rooted in the social model of disability. So we've seen already today, if you are like particularly fearful of language, there's so much material out there. There's so many glossaries. There's so much work that's already been done that can support you, and sort of recognizing that language, of course, is evolving all the time. I think another thing is, if you do get it wrong, apologize and don't be defensive about it. And that's, it's quite an obvious thing to say, but I think that's a really sort of a key thing to support you. And then there's loads of kind of practical things you can do if you're worried. So, with our project, similar to the MA and their inclusivity guidelines for the conference, we developed a set of inclusivity guidelines for each workshop. So you can sort of come back, you can develop these and shape these up together with people with lived experience and expertise around disability. And if you do get stuck or you get worried, you can keep coming back to these and referring back. And that can just be a really practical and helpful way to sort of get over some of that fear. But also, it's been years, like decades now. We need to get over it and just get on with it, don't we?
Yeah, don't we just start somewhere, for goodness sake. I would say as well, the backlash side of things is not just in newspapers, it gets the glamorous end of it in newspapers and on Twitter. It can actually be in your spaces. So some of the front of house training I do for SEND is very much to equip people with the confidence to use friendly, welcoming language and approaches. And that's not necessarily for supporting a SEND family coming through. One of the scenarios we talk about is what other visitors, and this happens sadly quite a lot, what if other visitors complain or comment or criticize on disabled children, particularly neurodivergent children who might be maybe presenting differently in the setting, and they make a complaint, because museums aren't for those kind of people, are they? Because sadly, some of our visitors are still on that, need a long journey of re-educating. And it's actually, it's about equipping your front of house staff with the tools to be able to do that, but then backing them up. So yes, have those Q&As. That's a really good way. When this happens, we say this, have the party line so it's consistent, but also make sure as the managers, who I think most of you on the call here today are at that level, that you back up your staff, and so you do have it written in policies and documents, you do have it in your access statements, which are visible on your website clearly, so that you say, as an organization, this is our take on it, and we are moving forward, and if you don't like it as a visitor, then sorry, it's your problem, really. Hopefully that makes sense as well. We just got 2 minutes, or maybe a couple of minutes each, maybe. So what was one thing you would like delegates to take away from your session today? Angela, the floor's yours.
I think that, to finish on a positive note, because I don't feel like I was the positive person today, I think keep in mind the way that you can change someone's life by making them feel seen, heard, and believed. And if they walk in a museum and they see an object that can be the most boring object you have, but it relates to their lived experience, they will feel seen. And when you have an illness or a disability, and especially if it's in the case that I look at, one that's not visible and often believed, it will change their life. So you literally have the power with just very small things to change someone's life.
You absolutely do, Angela. Thank you. And the experience as well. So I think for me, I think it's about the journey into that space. I do really passionately believe museums are very different to any other space. Galleries a little bit too. There's some gallery people on the call today, but being in that space and being allowed to being visible in that space as a visitor, and using the space that's appropriate for you.
I'm gonna steal a few seconds, but someone came to the exhibition that I did with the flat lace that I had never seen, that I had never met, but they came and they didn't tell me, and they walked in and they said, that's my flat lay. That's my life experience that no one believed for years, but now I'm in a museum. That's gold.
Yeah, exactly. We do have a power and a responsibility.
I had chills, they had chills. It was just, that's what we can do. And no budget, and we did it. So it's doable.
Well done. That's fantastic. And Sarah, follow that. No, Sarah, what was yours? Sorry, that's mean of me.
Mine is like really practical and quite different, but it's being said all throughout today. It's just actually I really hope that the sessions, the panel discussions today have helped you develop more confidence in understanding disability is something that is very ordinary every day. Sam, you brought this up, that's throughout, and Angela, I know your work is so focused on that, and it's really important. It shouldn't just be something that's sort of shied away from, avoided. We shouldn't even see it as something that's fearful. So it's really just about, hopefully you feel more confident to go away, to be able to do your own research, draw on the wealth of materials that have been shared today, as well as there's so much guidance and material already out there that's been produced. So that's it, really. Just really hope that you feel more confident in undertaking this work in the future.
Thank you so much, though, yourself, Sarah, and Angela. That's been just magical, and how wonderful as well to wrap up. I think everything you said, both of you, was very positive. Actually, there's a lot to hope for. We've got a few minutes left. Before I do like a close, are there any burning questions, Rebecca? I'm sure there's dozens. Questions for Angela and Sarah in particular for this session, Rebecca?
You know what? I think it's lots of agreement rather than questions, and sort of and actually, Sarah, your encouragement. I think a lot of people are sort of saying the same thing in the chat. This is, someone put it, the first step in a marathon. So, did you see a question, Angela? Is that what you?
Yes, someone asked about like ways to keep up to date with terminology, and I wanted to add something because all of the people that I've worked with in my projects are communities based on social media, and there's a lot of bad things on social media, but there's lots of very fantastic things. And to keep up to date with terminology, personally, I use I follow a lot of accounts that are on Instagram that are just fantastic educators online. That is just fantastic and very well known, but also very little tapped in. And they're brilliant. So if you're on social media, but some of them have websites and stuff where they feedback, there is an incredible international community that's working so hard to educate people, to help them for free on how to keep up to date, how to make sure they use the right language and so on. So I think that's a very wonderful resource. And for museums, it's very easy to access because you all have social media to do that.
I totally agree. I think go and find the people or find, or even actually perhaps go on, presumably Sarah, Angela, and all the speakers today or on Twitter, go and find out who you follow and then follow them. That's the quickest way of doing it, isn't it? And then, educate yourself through lived experience of people tweeting. I do think it's, I don't know what we did before Twitter and where did I live before Twitter. Thank you so much. Somebody's just, I can't remember your name. It just flashed up. Can we do this again next week? Yes and no. No, we can't do this again next week because it took me and Rebecca and everybody else an amazing amount of time to put together. But yes, of course, you could do this next week because we're hoping that from tomorrow you'll start doing this or more of this. Hopefully, thank you so much to all of our speakers today. If you're all still on the call, that's been really wonderful. And also all of yourselves, your participants. Look, gosh, you've got over 100 people still. Hope you found that really, really useful. So take homes, I guess. Well, I think you're all going to take, I'm not going to tell you what to take home from this because you're all going to take home what's appropriate for you. I think the discussion that we had, particularly around the recruitment side of things, when we talked about with the lived experience of that, some of these things can be done they can be done. That's what you do next week. How you changed your sending out your pre-interview process for everybody, that doesn't cost any money, does it? That's just an adjustment on how you look at things. So many That's not necessarily what I say a quick win, but so many big wins don't necessarily cost a lot of money or require a huge amount of planning. It's just the right sort of mindset, really. And I think getting everyone on board, that keeps on coming up. Everybody has to be on board. It's not one person's responsibility, even if, and how many places still have this, one dedicated person is responsible for access in your organization. Those roles tended to go quite quickly, didn't they, in various local authority cuts? But, it's everybody's job to make sure that, all visitors and all people working within your museums, be they part-time people, full-time people, volunteers, contractors, that's another group that we didn't talk about as well. And also that the contractors in your organization, so like your cafe staff, for instance, if you have a cafe that's contracted out, they've got to follow your policies and your belief systems too, because as a visitor, if I come to the museum and everybody stops at the cafe or the shop, don't they? And those two places don't feel like they're the same kind of balance of inclusion as the rest of your place. That's what I'm going to remember, and that's what I'll probably, moan about on social media if I was to then go and do that afterwards. That's not the message you want going out. Some positives just to end on as well. So message here from Rebecca that a September-October edition of the Museums Journal will be all completely an anti-ableism takeover. So please get in touch with Rebecca, who I'm sure you've put your details up, if you're interested in contributing to that or finding out a bit more of information about that. And obviously as well, the MA conference in November 2023. It's in Newcastle and Gateshead. It's going to have a strong focus on access and inclusion. And you will have seen that with a call out for papers for speakers. Disability was first time ever, and I'm allowed to say that, Rebecca, the first time ever disability was actually listed as a thing, as a topic for discussion. So again, the call out has gone through, but if there was something you're burning, then send that to Rebecca as well. And I'm sure we can get that looked at if there's something you really wanted to share. We've got just a couple more minutes. Is there anybody that wants to, if Rebecca, is anyone that particularly said, well, you didn't answer this, or hopefully everybody feels that they have had their burning questions answered today. Are we all feeling a little tired? Just a couple of nods and smiles there. The people who's not on the camera, I mean, they may be asleep for all I know. But, it's wonderful. Hopefully you've had a really good time. This is supposed to feel like you've eaten a massive meal and you feel a bit, because it's not heavy stuff, but it's really important stuff, and it's day-to-day stuff, and it's not just actually in your place of work, is it? It's when you walk out from your place of work. You will notice this more now as you're moving around in society. It's everybody's opportunity and also obligation to be accessible in everything that you do in your life, not just at work. Thank you so much again to the speakers, and thank you to Rebecca and Museum Association for putting on this, what seems to be an incredibly popular event, looking for the things pinging up on the bottom of the screen. It's been an absolute pleasure to sit with you here today and explore these things. Thank you, and take care.
Thanks, bye everyone.
Bye.